For the kindergarten teacher, this could have been a completely ordinary day, but today she decided to hold a grand parent-teacher meeting with His Highness the Emperor. The heroine suggested to her elder brother, a respectable gentleman, that he look through the journal in which all of Maxian's linguistic habits were recorded. The great emperor named Nors Gidhide took a deep breath, and a mixture of curiosity and incomprehension was visible in his eyes. The lady warned him that the same thing applied to his brother, making it clear that the conversation should be serious. Next to the emperor was the captain of the Knights of the Sanctuary of the Supreme, named Johann Daisath, and the lady warned that if you read the document, you can find out that Maylene hit the boy. This had already happened 10 times in a month, which is why she decided to call the relatives of the restless children. The boys bowed their heads low before the teacher, realizing that she would hardly be able to forgive them. The lady asked in a low voice to raise her head. She wanted to look into the eyes of the people she was talking to. Smiling, the lady admitted that this was the only way they could start the parent-teacher meeting and find out all the children's problems. The youngest captain of the God Sanctuary Knights, whom even the highest aristocrats find difficult to meet face-to-face, and the emperor, the sky of the empire. High-ranking people are no exception, and a kindergarten teacher named Ethna Belchester decided to start a parent-teacher meeting. The meeting took place right here, in the cozy and well-known kindergarten called Loendel. The novel's main character is named Ethna, an ordinary teacher in the sunny class at the Empire's kindergarten. She can also be safely called a person who has fallen into the world of a novel, and in her past life she was a completely different person. As for her students in the solar class, she can confidently say that these children are not quite ordinary. The novel's main character, a little girl with pink hair, the daughter of a high priest named Maylene, adored her teacher beyond measure. Every morning, the girl was the first to run up to the teacher so she could hug her and wish her a wonderful day. In her little world, Lady Ethna was the embodiment of everything good, bright, and wise. The girl was always followed by the main character of the original novel, an imperial prince named Maxian Gidhide. And to put it simply, this class was full of heirs of prestigious families, which is why these children could be called unusual. How nice it would be if that was all, and as the teacher said, this is a world inside the novel, and it began with the following phrases. An 18-year-old lady named Mayling headed towards the terrace, and on the day of her coming of age, she was eagerly awaiting her debut. The sky was strewn with millions of bright stars, and on the balcony stood a respectable gentleman named Maxian. And yes, this was their first meeting. Every morning in the classroom began with a funny song, in which a gloomy day became brighter with a smile, and the heroes were not supposed to meet at 5 years old in kindergarten. And it's safe to say that the original plot didn't just change, it went down the drain in an instant. Ethna chose to work as a kindergarten teacher, which she had been in her past life, simply to earn a living. This could not be taken lightly, so every day the heroine gave it her all and sang cheerful songs with a happy face. Thus, the kindergarten turned into the best educational institution in the empire, and who would have thought that the main characters would meet here so soon? The little ones didn't yet know what fate awaited them, and Maxian hated this pink-haired girl with every fiber of his being. The sun had barely had time to break through the curtains when their ringing voices soared above the singing of birds, announcing the beginning of a new battle. Little Maylene and Maxian, like two small hurricanes, collided every morning within the walls of a cozy garden. Teacher Ethna, a young woman with the patience of an angel and a smile that could melt the harshest ice, selflessly rushed to separate them each time. But alas, her efforts often resembled attempts to tame two feisty kittens fighting over a string. These little children hit each other much more skillfully than any adult, with all the childish hatred and rage. She dreamed of the day when Maylin and Maxian would finally understand that playing together was more interesting than arguing, but for now, every morning started the same way. The little girl's brother came to the meeting and asked the teacher to speak with him freely, despite his high status. One of these men was an emperor, the other a captain of knights, and the teacher was puzzled as to how she could express herself freely in front of them. Mr. Norse admitted that since the lady had called them so far, he very much hoped that it had been worth it. The teacher suddenly felt as if the presence of these people was pressing down on her like a concrete slab. She understood perfectly well that in this situation she definitely could not retreat, and decided that it was necessary to get down to business as soon as possible. Ethna explained that at this age, children are very active, and during the active development of large muscles, they need to move a lot. She knew all the secrets of how to flexibly conduct a meeting with guardians, and most importantly, how to make it clear that the child has no problems, and above all, how to reassure the guardian himself. Everything happened exactly as she had expected, and the emperor soon became indignant that the teacher's introduction was too long and terrible. The teacher was prepared for this and admitted that because of this, sometimes children cannot control their strength and accidentally hurt other people. Johann couldn't understand what all this meant, and the emperor's face showed a look of extreme bewilderment. Nors angrily asked if anyone dared to touch the body of a member of the imperial family. The captain of the knights somehow tried to smooth things over, and laughingly admitted that the young prince seemed incredibly mischievous. The young men began to quarrel among themselves. The emperor considered this unfair, but Johann did not see anything serious in this problem, since they were just children. It probably wasn't a good idea to call these people together, but the teacher had a serious plan that she was going to follow. She needed to make it clear to the emperor and the captain that the children were fighting with each other, and they do this every morning of a fine day. Upon hearing about the fight, Johann called it impossible because the baby was the kind of child who would never even hurt an insect, and Maxian had been conscientiously taught etiquette in the imperial family. In fact, the heroine thought the same thing when she read the original plot, but everything turned out completely differently. At this age, it is difficult not to give in to impulsive actions, and in fact, the more serious problem lies elsewhere. And she was sure that this situation urgently needed to be intervened in, and if things continued like this, the situation could get worse. In the future, it will be incredibly difficult for children to get close to their classmates, including children of their own age. The young men thought for a moment. None of them even suspected that this situation was really that serious. It was about the youngest daughter of the high priest, who could shoot down a flying bird, and about the only prince of the empire, whom no one dared to treat carelessly. At the same time, no one dared to approach these children, and the teacher understood that she would have to explain everything that was happening for too long. Efna promised to do everything possible to guide the children on the right path, but admitted that she needed help from adults. Yes, she was a kindergarten teacher, but a huge responsibility also lay on the shoulders of her relatives. There was complete silence in the room. The young men looked like parents of newcomers, but still, compared to the other guardians, they were just short lambs. At such moments, it is important to hold the reins tightly, and the teacher understood this perfectly well. Johann was the first to speak out, and he solemnly promised to talk to the little girl and discuss her behavior. The emperor was supposed to answer next, but he remained silent, and the teacher decided to find out how he was going to proceed. Sighing, the young man declared that he would definitely give instructions to the imperial teacher to talk to Maxian. Only Lady Efna knew that this would definitely not work, and the young men were a little confused about what exactly they should do. She turned to the emperor with confidence and declared that he should personally speak with the child as soon as possible. The emperor looked into the teacher's eyes and asked if she really didn't understand at all who she was talking to. The emperor was the sky of the empire, and in his opinion, the girl should know how much time he had allocated to come here. His words began to press with force again, and Efna stated that since the emperor had found the time, she was sure that he would be able to pay more attention to the child as well. And even if he didn't like these conditions, she was ready to accept a terrible execution, because she had already died once, and she had nothing to fear. After her words, the emperor stood up from his seat, laughed loudly, and at that moment huge goosebumps ran across the girl's body. Efna began to worry. Perhaps she had gone too far in her conversation, and yet the emperor himself stood before her, and she could very well seem careless. Suddenly, the captain decided to intervene, saying that the teacher was right, and anyone who makes excuses and neglects their family looks pathetic. The teacher only prayed that the captain would not try to tease the already angry emperor now. Johann had such a smug look on his face, as if he himself was completely innocent. Therefore, she addressed the gentleman, stating that the same thing applies to him, and the young men are in absolutely the same conditions. She warned the gentleman to talk to the children about their life in kindergarten, and on the one hand it could be called an occupational disease, when you risk your own life because you have to. The desperate struggle to resist persuasion during the parent-teacher meeting required incredible strength. It seemed that after the teacher's words, the young men thought deeply, well, this reaction was quite natural. Raising children can be called the hardest work in the world. This is exactly what the teacher was trying to achieve. Suddenly, the office door opened and a small, blue-eyed lady appeared in the office. The little sister immediately saw her brother, whom she loved incredibly. The sweet little girl had to run up to the gentleman to hug him with all her childish sincerity. And what was Johan's surprise when the girl first ran up to her teacher and loudly declared that she loved her incredibly. All this time, the little girl was worried about the parent-teacher meeting, so she couldn't resist and went to her teacher. Malin asked with sad eyes if it was really because of her behavior that her older brother was now being scolded. This girl was incredibly sweet. The teacher rushed to calm her down, and she simply told her brother what a good girl she was. Makshin then entered the office, threateningly declaring that it was forbidden to burst into the office without permission. This morning, he clearly did not expect to see the emperor in his office, a meeting for which he was certainly not prepared. The gentleman turned to the boy and asked him why he was being so rude to his classmate. The girl hugged her teacher tightly and said, "Did stupid Maxian finally have problems?" The arrival of the children eased the tension a little. The younger sister brushed off the night captain, and this was very unexpected. The teacher suggested ending today's meeting because the children were too tired of waiting and it was time to go to class. While the captain was perplexed, the teacher turned to the emperor because she wanted to discuss something with him. Mr. Norse looked like a very tall, noble gentleman, and the teacher didn't even reach his shoulder. The little girl pulled the boy along with her because the teacher had just told them to leave and get ready for class. Finding herself too close to the emperor, the teacher seemed to forget everything she wanted to talk to him about. Efna tried to somehow tell the gentleman that he was standing too close, and she didn't notice how she touched his chest with her hands. Touching the great emperor, the teacher screamed in surprise because it was unlikely that anyone could touch him. And just now she, usually a kindergarten teacher, touched the chest of the emperor himself with both hands. In fact, all this time the young man was trying to approach the shelf that was behind the teacher. He noticed that it was so old and it seemed like it was about to break. The emperor didn't even suspect that Efna was now thinking about something completely different, being so close to him. The heroine did not dare to raise this topic, but admitted that they needed to decide how to address each other. The emperor took her words in surprise, as if he was not at all ready to communicate with the teacher any further. The most important aspect in learning is the proper relationship between teacher and guardian. And in order for everything to work out well, Efna decided that it was necessary to establish contact with the emperor by any means necessary. She held out her hands and joyfully declared that now the emperor could repeat after her and simply call her Madam Teacher. It was likely that no one had ever asked Norsa about something like this before, and it was unlikely that anyone would dare try to establish contact with a high-ranking official. The lady continued to smile. She was sure that it was not that difficult. She just needed to be patient. He tried to pronounce the first letters of the word teacher, but it was as if there was a huge lump stuck in his throat that prevented him from making a sound. Efna knew perfectly well how to deal with children. Now she imagined that it was not the emperor who stood before her, but just an ordinary boy. From that moment on, she asked to address her as Madam Teacher when he was in kindergarten. Now she decided to take advantage of the moment, go on the attack, and declared that this was even more important. The lady assured that it was all a matter of mutual formal address, and this meant that the emperor should not use informal speech in the presence of children. On the one hand, the emperor understood perfectly well what she was talking about, but it was still difficult for him to be in such a situation. Now the heroine finally felt a little relief, and she had been preparing for this conversation for a long time. The emperor was incredibly good at formal speech, but for some reason he took too long to straighten up and suddenly asked the teacher to come to the imperial palace. He suggested that this be considered a house-to-house visit, and as soon as the teacher heard about it, she couldn't believe her ears. It sounded like he was inviting her over, like in a romantic fantasy, like you want to come over for coffee. The teacher did not meet alone with the students' guardians, and this was the first time the emperor had met a teacher who called a home visit a private meeting. Efna tried to find out the reason why the emperor insisted on leaving, because the proposal itself sounded strange. She couldn't even imagine why he decided to call her to the imperial palace, because today there was a parent-teacher meeting where they could talk about everything. Suddenly, the emperor touched the tip of her ear with his hand, while the girl's cheeks were filled with a red blush. Norse admitted that he would like to speak privately with the teacher, and there is nothing unusual about this at all. He whispered that he wanted to know a lot, but there were too many ears here for such a sincere conversation. He meant that he wanted to know about the boy, but he was also interested in the teacher, for whom he had many questions. The lady still wondered why the emperor decided to come so close to her that she was ready to fall through the ground. His interest was noticeable, in fact. He simply cared about his little relative. 5 years ago, a strange event occurred in one of the empire's towns, which immediately became the talk of horror among local residents. The maids whispered that the master had added Lady Lillian to the family register. She was a daughter and had only been in the mansion for a month. The news quickly spread throughout the mansion. The maids were sure that Lady Lillian had a special advantage. The lady was renowned for her talent, and the one thing that Lady Ethna could never have, no matter how the heavens turned. Everyone knew about the family's mysterious talent, and it was impossible for a relative not to possess it. One of the maids was sure that it was only a matter of talent, but in many other respects Lady Lillian was much more dominant. While the maids were whispering among themselves, they did not notice how the silhouette of a lady in a nightgown appeared in the corridor. It was Lady Ethna, and she asked menacingly what the maids were chatting about here, and what it meant to be a Windestra. The lady decided to ask this question because she really didn't understand what this phrase meant, and it seemed like she would go crazy if she didn't find out. The maid was incredibly irritated by the mistress's muttering, judging by her manner. Although she was a lady, she was treated here no worse than a mongrel. The servants began to whisper about what had happened to the mistress, and whether she had eaten something spoiled. But Ethna said that perhaps it was all because she lacked that very talent that we just talked about. The main character was indeed stuck in the wrong romance, but she had no choice but to start living a new life. After many years of working as a teacher, she realized that she had suffered a serious professional injury. When she saw a rude child, she certainly could not leave him without education, and the same applied to all adults. And the maids were just little girls to her, whom she now invited to sit on a chair for reflection and think about their behavior. The family of Count Winderster was truly special. All representatives were born with outstanding talent, some with a beautiful voice, and some with incredible physical abilities. There was a young man in the family with a talent for business, and these people excelled in various fields. Although the Count's family did not have a long history, it was precisely thanks to these talents that they were able to take their place among the central aristocracy. For the first time in the family's history, a child without talent was born, and he was immediately treated with disdain. It was this child who turned out to be the main character, named Ethna, and her fate was definitely doomed. The lady dreamed of becoming a happy heroine, but still, the resettlement turned out to be a huge mistake. She managed to remember the plot of the original story, but now the main characters hadn't even been born yet. And Ethna ended up in the body of the talentless Ethna Wenderster, a simple 17-year-old girl, in no way connected to the main characters. The main character's new life story did not promise anything pleasant, and the girl understood that she needed to become strong in order to survive in this world. Fortunately, she was not alone in this cruel world, and on this terrible day her beloved sister was looking for her again. This dazzling child, a radiant girl with sincere eyes, was a half-sister named Lillian. Besides her, the heroine had 2 annoying older brothers, with whom her relationship did not work out from the very beginning. The little sister admitted that she had been looking for Ethna for a long time, and that she probably had some important business to attend to. She happily took her sister by the hand and suggested that they go somewhere to eat, because her father said that he would definitely buy them something tasty. This was very unexpected. Until now, her father had only given Ethna dried, spoiled food. Lillian asked how about inviting her sister's fiancé, the Marquis himself, who should have already returned to his domain. For some reason, the lady looked very disappointed, and Ethna did not understand the reason for her behavior. The impudent older brother decided to address his sister, saying that she should have been softer and that she shouldn't have spoken like that at all. Although no one had approached him at all, the gentleman declared that he was ready to endure this disgrace, but now his little sister had driven him crazy. His stupid behavior seemed too delusional. The young man was simply angry for no apparent reason, and surely no one noticed it. He flared up in just a few seconds, even though no one was even talking to him. The heroine was indignant, and she did not want to discuss her fiancé at all, and it did not matter whether there were relatives standing in front of her or not. After her words, the young man began to shout even louder, declaring that his sister had completely gone crazy and even dared to snap at him. The young man was ready to shout at the whole room, but suddenly a man's hand stopped him, and the man asked him not to speak like that in front of the servants anymore. A respectable gentleman appeared in the room, who was the father of the untalented young gentleman who allowed himself to be treated as he pleased. The father turned to Lady Efna, to whom she was even afraid to answer anything, realizing how angry he could become at any moment. The young lady's tears flowed down onto the wooden floor, and she didn't expect this to happen at all. A bright red mark from the blow appeared on the girl's cheek, but despite this, she stood with her head held high. Her father had just slapped her in front of all her relatives over something so simple and ordinary. The man insisted that if a lady had no talent, she should live as if she didn't have one, and unlike her, Lillian showed another talent. On her very first attempt, Lillian hit the target at shooting, and this proves that the girl's talent is the same as that of the first count, and today the family gathered to celebrate this. On a day when everyone should be happy, the father was perplexed at how a worthless girl dared to upset his daughter. And he didn't care at all that the girl standing in front of him was also a daughter to him, just like Lillian. Her cheek slowly began to hurt from the blow. The heroine understood that she had to argue. She had to get angry. Unfortunately, her body did not move at all, as if it was frozen, and the heroine felt like a huge block of ice. Lillian suggested leaving his sister to rest and going to the festival as soon as possible, as she was so hungry and wanted to celebrate her achievements. Lillian's father had a completely different relationship. He took her to boutiques every day, and she could do what she liked. And in this terrible house full of lies and deceit, the heroine felt more insignificant than a bug. In this, unlike her room, it doesn't stink or leak, and no one bothers her over silly little things. Efna was so furious that she was ready to break something right now, just to feel better, but suddenly she saw a gun on the table. Perhaps if she shoots right now, it will at least somehow smooth out the situation and make her feel more confident. Taking the gun in her hands, the heroine took aim at the target to release the accumulated negative emotions. The recoil from the pistol turned out to be much stronger than she expected, but despite this, the girl really enjoyed this activity. It was as if all the pain that remained from the previous heroine had just flown out along with the bullet, cutting through the air. Having looked closely, the heroine did not believe what she told you, because she ended up in the very center, and perhaps she was just lucky. This made her even more happy. Now she really felt a little better. The sound turned out to be louder than she expected. The heroine understood that if she was caught, she would be scolded again, and it was better to quickly return to the mansion before anyone noticed. She made a small mistake. The target she had just shot at was still in place. Time flew by at the Marquis of Vilchen's residence, and the heroine was busy preparing for new classes every evening. It was already late at night when she finally finished the assignment, filling the thickest notebook. Lessons on how to be a bride by day, paperwork by night, and the heroine found herself being used as a servant. After a long, grueling day of work, the heroine decided to go out to school, at least to get some fresh air, to come to her senses. As soon as she left her room, she immediately heard a sound coming from Hardness's room. This guy named Hardness was her fiancé, and the young man was talking tenderly to someone, calling someone beautiful. Efna never expected to find her boyfriend in the same room late at night with her beloved sister Lillian. She stopped outside the room to listen to the conversation, and they were just discussing how her little sister was much more beautiful than Efna. Suddenly, her boyfriend declared that the engagement to this gloomy woman was just a way to marry another girl. This girl turned out to be her beloved little sister Lillian, who was right now in her boyfriend's room. Efna would never have thought that her sister could do such a thing, but now she saw with her own eyes the cruel reality happening behind her back. The young man stood next to Lillian, whispering tender words in her ear, and this wedding actually turned out to be a simple deception. In a passionate embrace, the heroes discussed intense jealousy, which was incredibly difficult for each of them to come to terms with. Just think, the daughter of the main wife was born without talent. Everyone considered it pathetic and miserable, but at least this worthless girl was quite good at paperwork. Since the heroine had no special talents, she was assigned paperwork, and suddenly a roar was heard in the silence of the mansion. The candle fell from the heroine's hands. She began to sob loudly, and in despair she ran out into the street at night. The girl's head was spinning very much. She had just learned the cruel truth, and in fact, in this story, she was only hated behind her back. The heroine felt as if something was about to burst out. She felt very nauseous, and tears were streaming down her face. Her chest was squeezed by unbearable pain, sadness, and despair, for which the fragile girl was not prepared. In the body of another person, Efna did not understand how the heroine could endure this all this time, and she did not even notice how someone was approaching her. Someone shouted for the lady to run away immediately, but it was too late. The fast horse rushed straight towards the heroine, and it seemed that his hooves were about to touch her head. A pool of blood appeared on the dark, damp ground, and the doomed girl was definitely not prepared for such a fate. A loud scream was heard in the bedroom, and the girl barely woke up from a terrible, horrible nightmare. She incredibly frightened the maid who was in her room and was watching her mistress closely. Since the lady had woken up, the maid said that it was probably enough to keep losing consciousness, and it was too inconvenient. Just a second ago, the heroine was sure that she had just been hit by a carriage, but fortunately, she woke up in her room. She excitedly asked what day it was today, and the maid replied that it was the 4th according to the imperial calendar. Efna couldn't believe it, because today should definitely be the 29th, but for some reason she woke up at a different time. A young man approached her and asked if everything was okay with the lady, and he accidentally heard a scream in the corridor. Suddenly the heroine fainted, the gentleman became very agitated, and right then she saw his impudent face. It was her boyfriend who claimed they had breakfast together today, and his fiancée suddenly fainted. If he really did come to the Count's estate, then today is indeed a different date, which means the heroine has returned in time to before her death. She tried to collect her thoughts, but this guy wouldn't shut up and continued to mumble something happily. Efna was in no mood to talk to this man at all, and she asked the overly noisy young man to leave. Listening to his voice, she felt like she was getting dumber with each passing second, and she just prayed that he would finally shut his mouth. The young man seemed not to have heard her at all, or was deliberately pretending not to understand anything. He assumed that people were probably still not well, and suggested that they just see each other later, when she finally came to her senses. And if this wasn't the worst nightmare, then the heroine needed to do only one thing as quickly as possible. Since early morning, the maids had been discussing that Lady Efna had gone mad again, and no one understood why she simply couldn't live a quiet life. No one expected to see her right in the corridor, but now the girl didn't care at all what they said behind her back. Holding the papers in her hands, the heroine asked everyone to step aside. She was going to urgently talk to her father, despite the fact that the Count was currently busy. The maid offered to hand over the documents for her, but from the angry look on the lady's face, everything was obvious. They didn't even interfere in her case anymore, and realized that now it was better for them to just shut up and not interfere. At that moment, my father came out of his office and asked what all the commotion was going on in the corridor. Father came out just in time, saving Efna from having to go inside his office. She decided to get straight to the point, and immediately suggested to her father that he remove her from the family register as soon as possible. Before she could finish saying this phrase, she again saw the hated guy nearby, about whom she already knew too much. The young man allegedly approached the lady with concern and asked why she had decided to remove herself from the family register. He assured her that the lady was still not herself and was being controlled by illness, and that she simply needed to ask the Count for treatment. Efna knew the whole truth. She pushed away the hand of her future groom, who tried with all his might to dissuade her. Now her thoughts were much clearer than those of this fool, and she asked him not to touch her again without permission. The heroine's new life meant she was ready to make important decisions, and today she had something for her future groom. The lady handed the young man a letter of annulment of the engagement and declared that she had no need of such a husband. Hendrik looked at the small envelope with bewilderment, not understanding why the noble wife had suddenly decided to break off the engagement. In front of all the maids, she proudly declared that from that moment on, the engagement was abandoned and that she no longer had any ties to this man. At that moment, her sweet little sister came up and asked what was going on here. Efna said, now her sister can proudly take away her hated husband, and from now on, Lillian can easily take her place, as well as the place of her future beautiful wife. The lady said that everything she had thrown out of her life was much better suited for her little sister. No one expected such behavior from the lady, and in just a couple of minutes she sorted out her main problems. Lillian was sure her sister didn't suspect anything, but now even all the maids knew that the mistress had just given away her husband. And this meant only one thing: dear little sister Lillian would also get what she deserved for daring to deceive her sister behind her back. The previous heroine was tormented by the agony of choice. Every day she struggled with her desires, wanting to be a beautiful bride and a good daughter. Efna was not prepared to endure such a fate, and found the courage to break up with her unfaithful husband and leave him to her deceitful sister. Perhaps now it would be even better for her to get out of this damned little house, because if she stays here for even a second longer, she will definitely go down on her own. Having opened the closet, the heroine decided to collect all her things in order to understand how much work needed to be done. Opening the closet, she saw only one thick notebook lying on one of the shelves instead of a pile of clothes. This notebook clearly belonged to the previous heroine, and Efna decided to find out a little about the girl she now was. The book said that today the heroine was convinced that she, like the first count, possessed exactly the same talent. The conversation was about the talent of the first Earl of Vendester, but the heroine did not understand why this was written in Efna's personal notebook. All this time she was sure that it was her little sister who possessed a magnificent talent, and once in this body, the girl did not feel any abilities. She continued reading the diary. One day the heroine fired a pistol out of curiosity, and all shots hit the bull's eye. Then the girl secretly played her father's violin, and was able to easily perform a melody that she had once heard on the street. That was not all. Efna wanted to learn. She stole her brother's book on the language of another kingdom, and although the letters were unfamiliar, she was soon able to read. A talent for languages, a talent for business, and everything indicated that the previous heroine was not at all an ordinary girl. Could it be that the real Lady Efna did indeed possess the talents of a count, but for some reason she carefully hid this information from her family? And now the heroine has learned that Efna is not at all the ordinary stupid girl that everyone else thought she was. Let's return to the present time, when the heroine has already managed to enter the family of Viscount Belchester. When she, having run away from her family, was trembling somewhere in an alley, the Viscount appeared as a savior and sheltered the poor girl. Since the family's finances were too meager to be useful, the heroine took a responsible job. She managed to get into a nearly destroyed kindergarten, which had been abandoned for a long time. Perhaps it was at that moment that luck pushed her like the wind, carrying her in the right direction. As magical engineering developed throughout the empire, the importance of skill and knowledge increased, and many were now engaged in training. Even aristocrats, who once considered learning and work shameful, now began to immerse themselves in education. The academy, which had previously been a place for aristocratic socializing, became a real educational institution, and kindergartens began to attract great attention, as they were responsible for early education. 2 years later, a real kindergarten boom swept the empire, and its center was the teacher Lady Efna. The children adored their mistress incredibly, and every day they came to kindergarten classes with joyful smiles. The director of the kindergarten respected this girl, who, like no one else, handled her job responsibly. One day she came to class and politely asked if the teacher could attend the charity masquerade ball that evening. The heroine was happy to agree, but was afraid that she would be recognized, although the ball was a masquerade, and it was quite easy to hide her face. Efna realized that she could just go in a mask, and then there wouldn't be any problems. Perhaps because she owed the Viscount so much, she couldn't refuse him and decided to simply consider it overtime work. The masquerade ball was rather boring, and the heroine only thought that when she returned home, she would run to sort out today's reports and prepare a schedule for the month. While she was thinking about the tasks ahead, she heard children's voices, and one of the boys was clearly unhappy about something. The young gentleman screamed, his comrade stepped on his foot, and asked his friend not to contradict him under any circumstances. The teacher noticed that the situation was getting heated, and several children were now united against one. The mask gave the lady confidence, and she was ready, as a responsible teacher, to help sort out the dispute. The young gentleman began to shout louder and louder, calling the other boy a little pigeon who dared to snap back. Judging by the child's loud screams, one could conclude that at this rate the boy would definitely hit someone. The teacher could not stand aside because an outrageous situation was happening right in front of her. Some lady told the girl that it would be better not to interfere and suggested that she just stand there like everyone else. These three were children of central aristocratic houses. It was a pity that they were bullying a child, but no one could do anything about this situation. It seemed that the boys were only 8 years old, and the conversation really was about central aristocratic houses. That is why the aristocrat asked the lady to stay away from these children, and it would be better to just stand quietly. The more the heroine observed the boys' behavior, the more she realized that she needed to intervene in this situation. In a loud teacher's tone, she decided to address the children, calling them the main offenders of this event. Efna told the children to stop immediately, and the boys to stop attacking the defenseless man. Even at such a young age, these boys already understood that they had always remained unpunished, and did not the lady know who they were? All the aristocrats were watching the situation closely, and this act was incredibly brave on the part of the young lady. Others called her stupid because the boy's father was a respectable marquise, known throughout the empire. The teacher didn't care at all about their parents' statuses, and most importantly, she wanted to teach the rascals a lesson. She was not afraid to take off her mask and declared that no father could help the boy in this situation. The teacher told him to call his father immediately, as she had not seen him for too long. The boys immediately recognized the teacher, who was no less famous than the child's most famous father. Continuing to look menacingly at the boys, Efna wished that the boys would stop behaving like this as soon as possible. The guests began to whisper in front of them was the same teacher from the Loendel kindergarten, which had recently been abandoned. It was Mrs. Efna who was that famous teacher who copes well with any children. The lady wondered if the children didn't know how to greet a teacher properly, but were perfectly capable of cornering someone in a group. One look from the mistress could make one start behaving sensibly, and that was exactly what the girl was trying to achieve. Efna loudly declared that she had really taught the children such immoral behavior, and didn't they know that a crowd should not attack one person? She laughed, and the boys began to tremble in front of her, frightened that the teacher was scolding them after so much time. She called the children little rascals who decided to behave as they pleased, but at that moment another hero appeared in the hall. Behind her stood a tall, respectable gentleman in a black tuxedo and a black velvet mask, who was definitely an aristocrat. The boy who was being attacked by children screamed. His beloved older brother finally came to the party. He tried to tell the master that these scoundrels were insulting him, wanting to make a laughing stock of him in front of everyone. This man turned out to be the boy's older brother, and the heroine immediately felt his overwhelming aura. One only had to look at the other guests, and at the sight of this gentleman the gossips instantly shut their mouths. The kind young gentleman hugged his older brother tenderly and told them that they had had a fight with the boys in front of everyone. It wasn't a mutual quarrel, and the boy was so upset that his older brother immediately sensed it. Efna greeted the respectable gentleman, introducing herself as their teacher, and told him about the small quarrel, promising that their parents would arrive soon. The gentleman was sure that the parents would come crawling without a doubt, and they were definitely expected to appear with their children at the event. The teacher said it wasn't a fight, but one-sided bullying, and like their teacher, she sincerely apologized. The bullying couldn't be called a mistake this time. The blame lay entirely with the boys, but the teacher still felt guilty. At that moment, the children's parents appeared and were surprised that something like this could happen at a banquet. The gentleman in the black mask grinned as soon as he saw the marquis named Eliard Gopin in front of him. The man rushed to embrace his child and asked why the marquis's name was mentioned. The gentleman said that the marquis was a pathetic fool who couldn't even control his own child, and that was precisely the reason he decided to say so. It seemed as if the guest had gone crazy. The man asked if the gentleman really didn't know who he was and allowed himself to be treated so rudely. The gentleman asked him to stop talking nonsense because his son had just bullied his older brother, and didn't the Gopeng house teach that starting a fight you can't win is simply absurd? The gentleman slowly removed his black mask. The marquis stood rooted to the spot and did not say another word. No one expected to see this man at an ordinary banquet, because his title was too high for such events. Having removed his mask, the highly esteemed Duke Kaiden Hildebrand appeared before the guests, and the aristocrats were afraid to even breathe next to him. The man bowed low and offered his deepest apologies for his son's rude behavior. The arrogant Marquis Gopin had just personally bowed his head to the Duke, and well, the Duke's position was higher than that of the Marquise. Still, the name of this gentleman seemed familiar to the teacher. She tried to remember where she had heard it. Her feeling did not fail her. The next second, the teacher finally understood what kind of person was standing right in front of her. It was the Grand Duke Hildebrand, about whom there were too many rumors, but hardly anyone dared to have anything to do with this man. People live until they die, and in the novel there was one hero who was called a pathetic fool. Readers were not too kind to Bantide, and were sure that he would be better off begging for death with such a repulsive appearance. This good-natured boy who was attacked by boys was given the role of a prince who one day became a symbol of cruelty. And the heroine had only one question left. How did this sweet, innocent baby grow up to be such a villain? What happened to him? Suddenly, one of the girls fell right onto the cold marble floor, and the boy immediately wanted to help her. Looking at his brother, he asked if they should help the girl who was in trouble. But the young man with jet black hair sternly declared that a boy should under no circumstances solve other people's problems. At this moment, the teacher thought, this gentleman definitely cannot teach the child anything good. Efna decided to intervene in the conversation and stated that she would like to add something and convey information. Hildebrand turned his attention to the teacher and politely allowed her to share her opinion. The man's aura was so terrifying that it could hardly be called a joke, but unfortunately, Efna couldn't just stand there and remain silent. The lady stated that the gentleman should no longer leave the child alone, especially at his age, when attention can easily be attracted by something spectacular. The teacher had just scolded the Grand Duke in front of everyone, and people were whispering about whether she would be okay. No one could even imagine how the Duke would behave, and he could fire the teacher at any second. Instead of anger and fury, a slight smile appeared on the venerable gentleman's face. He confessed to the teacher that he would try to be careful in the future and would definitely take her wishes into account. The next day, Efna thought, it was a pity that she had not been able to talk with the Duke longer, and yesterday she was squeezed like a lemon. It was impossible to just let go of the original villain, young Master Bantier, without paying attention to his future fate. The teacher sighed heavily, and at that moment her colleague appeared in the office, who was sure that the girl needed to see something as soon as possible. In her hands was a book that the lady had found while cleaning the library, which was written in an ancient language. The lady couldn't read it, so she asked Efna if she knew anything about such a book. Looking at the first page of the book, the lady realized that this language was not at all as ancient as her colleague had thought. It was an ordinary modern book written in ordinary Korean. Efna asked to borrow an unusual book, and the lady warned that it simply had to be returned before the start of the faculty meeting. Everything turned out to be too unrealistic. Where did the teacher find such a book in the library? How could it even exist in this world? Efna held a book from her past in her hands, and now she was eager to find out what was written there. The first lines of the book told about Efna Vendester, who was a villain, and as soon as the heroine saw this, she immediately thought that she had simply misread it. She wasn't wrong at all. She was talking about a villain that no one in the world wanted to mess with. For some reason, the villain's name was exactly the same as hers, and with eyes wide with surprise, Efna continued reading. The heroine Efna was the most evil woman in the whole world. She always and everywhere said that she would kill the saint. As a result, the villain's neck ended up on the guillotine, and all the local residents gathered to see the last minutes of her life. For using black magic, which was banned in the Empire, the villainess was sentenced to death, and those who collaborated with her will be sent to the Grand Duchy of Hildebrand. This meant that the teacher would be sentenced to death in the future for using black magic. It was also surprising that the book was about the Duchy of Hildebrand, but Efna was hardly planning to go there, and suddenly she remembered the reason why Bantide once became a great villain. As soon as the heroine learned something, she immediately went to the Duke to discuss important issues, declaring her desire that Bantade would definitely start attending her kindergarten. She appealed personally to the Grand Duke Kaiden and was sure that he would understand her. She prepared important papers especially for the meeting and asked the Duke to read them carefully. The young man did not resist, and taking the paper in his hands, began to slowly study the information about the kindergarten. Efna was already halfway to success, and she did not want to let his younger brother become the main villain of the great empire. That is why she must stop him from turning black due to the Duke's death, which is supposed to happen in the future. This story was too complicated, but the teacher understood that the fate of many heroes now lay in her hands. She was almost sure that the Duke would agree right now, but the next second he confidently declared his refusal. Efna didn't even imagine that the Duke wouldn't even ask any questions, but would immediately and categorically refuse. The teacher explained that the kindergarten is a professional educational institution, which will definitely be useful for the young gentleman. The Duke assured him that the boy was already receiving a professional education, but Efna believed that it was important for a child to spend time with children his own age to broaden his horizons. The Duke reacted to this in a strange way, but what could be more disturbing than a child's relationships with his peers? The Duke sighed and thought for a moment, then suddenly unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. The teacher asked to take another close look at the documents, wondering why the Duke suddenly began to unbutton his shirt. She assured him that if the young gentleman went to kindergarten, he would definitely be enrolled in her class. The problem for the Duke was that he was his half-brother, and he was worried that the boy would be bullied for being an illegitimate child. The teacher asked me not to worry about it and to look at the last page of the documents. The Duke carefully studied the information to understand why the teacher decided to put forward such a proposal. The last page of the document was too strange, and the Duke asked in bewilderment what it all meant. With great joy in her eyes, the lady said that recently all the children from her class wrote letters to greet the young gentleman. The little students from the kindergarten were already eagerly preparing for the arrival of a new boy in their group. It was all quite nice, but for some reason the Duke was in no hurry to agree to send the young gentleman to kindergarten. He showed one of the drawings and asked in bewilderment whether Bante's name had really changed to something completely different without his knowledge. Indeed, there was a different name written on one of the drawings, and the teacher couldn't understand how she could have missed it. The Duke admitted that the letters were very impressive, but he was unlikely to have read anything other than the young gentleman's mistaken name. The teacher decided to tell him that they were going on a spring field trip soon, and it would be a wonderful experience for the boy. The Duke was still stuck on the previous topic, not understanding why the young gentleman's name could not be written correctly. The teacher turned out to be well informed, and indeed, the Duke paid special attention to this. A strange, frightening smile appeared on the gentleman's face, which was impossible not to notice. And right now, he sighed so heavily that it seemed like the second button on his shirt was about to come off. Trying not to look at the handsome young man's chest, the teacher continued to explain that their kindergarten was the first early education institution in the empire. Moreover, the empire now actively finances the early education of children, regardless of their status. The Duke noticed that the teacher was worried about the affairs of other territories and asked what exactly she really meant by this. In order to build a good educational institution in the Grand Duchy, the Lord must learn more about kindergartens, and this will be an excellent reference for the education of his people. People put forward their proposal with interest, which, in the young man's opinion, turned out to be too self-confident. He asked the teacher with interest to continue and also to explain the rules for admission to the new educational institution. Perhaps the Duke was truly interested in the interesting proposal, and Ethna was happy to tell him everything. After a long conversation, the next day, the same treasured boy named Bantade, whom everyone had been expecting, appeared in Ethna's class. The boy greeted the new children modestly, and some of them still couldn't pronounce his name correctly. One of the students said that Malin was saying his name incorrectly, but even the young master himself could not pronounce it. The children were incredibly happy to see their new friend, and each of them wanted the young gentleman to sit next to them. Ethna invited the boy to sit next to Maxian and said in a gentle voice that it was time for amazing stories. Today the teacher was going to tell the kids about the night of arithmetic and also learn new rules. Last night she had prepared herself perfectly for a new lesson, but suddenly she saw something strange on the stack of assignments. Right on top lay an envelope that definitely looked like a letter from the Imperial Palace with a burgundy seal. The teacher received information that the organizers had changed the location of the excursion, and now the tour was supposed to take place in the Imperial Palace, which Ethna had not expected at all. The children had already explored the area and made plans, and the teacher was sure they would go to the park. The director of the kindergarten warned that this was the first time the Imperial Palace had made such an offer, and no one could oblige them. This meant that the teacher and the children would have to review and redo all plans and completely change the theme of the trip. After talking with the director, the lady tried to address her colleagues, but everyone just said that they were too busy with their own affairs today. The teacher understood that she could not work overtime alone, and she needed help. Unfortunately, no matter who she approached, it turned out that everyone was incredibly busy on that particular day. So the next morning, the lady was not at all happy that overtime work had appeared again on her precious day off. The Imperial Palace was located quite far from the kindergarten, and the heroine sighed that in this world there wasn't even a regular taxi. Suddenly she heard someone nearby talking about the cost of the trip, and perhaps this someone could help her. She saw an incredibly cute hero with snow-white hair who was asking his assistant to take care of the upcoming trip. This mysterious guy was the brother of a girl who is in Ethna's class, Knight Captain Johann. Johann smiled so brightly that he didn't even notice that right now the coachman was trying to shake money out of him. Some man offered to go for too much money. So Efna decided it was necessary to bring justice to the unpleasant situation by offering the knight captain a much cheaper escape. The young man was incredibly happy as soon as he saw the teacher, and she was also incredibly happy to meet her guardian. She decided to immediately contact the coachman, who for some reason decided to offer the captain an expensive ride. Efna asked with confidence if the young man really wanted to take a large sum of money for a simple trip to an ordinary temple. The coachman brazenly declared that he really intended to travel only for a high price. The teacher couldn't even keep a calm expression on her face and looked at the impudent fellow with bewilderment. And she got angry every time she saw that someone dared to raise prices without a twinge of conscience. The lady seemed to be asking for huge problems right now, and the coachman asked in bewilderment why she dared to speak so brazenly. The girl asked menacingly how they could raise the price for such an innocent person, but the captain didn't even suspect it. "I'm slowly starting to get angry." The gentleman was indignant. "For such a distance, this is even a very cheap price." The teacher was not one of those who could be deceived. She was a local resident and asked for the price to be reduced immediately. According to the coachman, this price would not even cover the expenses, and this money would not be enough to pay for the horse's feed. Efna began bargaining with the coachman right in front of Johann, wanting justice to prevail. She insisted on a reasonable price for the trip and never budged during the argument. The teacher was already quite fed up with this stupid conversation. She warned that if the coachman continued to insist, she would take another carriage altogether. For the captain, the price difference was not that significant, but on the other hand, with that money, he could have bought a little girl's favorite candy. Perhaps it would have been better for the coachman to warm up from the very beginning, and luck was on the teacher's side after all. The man agreed to take the gentleman for a low price, and the captain promised that he would definitely buy sweets for little Maylene. Johann was already in a hurry to leave, because he needed to settle some things at the imperial palace. But suddenly he turned to the teacher and offered to go together, holding out his hand in a snow-white glove. For some reason, the gentleman really wanted to go with Efna, and he incredibly enjoyed talking to her. And he was sure that a wonderful trip awaited them ahead, if the teacher finally agreed. Literally a few minutes later, the lady was already sitting in a comfortable carriage, but she certainly would not have exchanged them for the soft seat of a car. Carriages seemed incredibly uncomfortable to her, and perhaps this was due to the memory of being hit by a carriage in a previous life. Probably the body remembered those sensations each time the tragedy echoed terribly in the depths of the teacher's soul. Even Johann noticed that the girl looked too mysterious and asked if everything unnecessary was in order. Continuing to look mysteriously out the window, the teacher asked the gentleman not to worry about her under any circumstances. He couldn't just ignore it, and even judging by her hands, which were shaking, he understood that she needed help. He turned to the teacher again, asking her to feel free to tell him what was bothering her. Johann asked the lady to inhale deeply for 3 seconds, and then exhale slowly for 7 seconds. If the lady is very seasick, she needs to try to calm down a little, and the captain even thoughtfully offered to count the seconds for her. Indeed, Efna felt very nervous and agreed to do the breathing exercise. The carriage rocked slowly from side to side as the teacher, having set off on an amazing adventure, tried to pull herself together. After a few minutes of proper breathing, she felt that she really did feel a little better. Johann was incredibly happy that this helped calm the lady down. This is exactly how he rocked little Maylene when she felt unwell on the trip. Johann's smile was so kind and sincere that it turned out that his aura radiated only light. The captain turned out to be quite an attentive man, and the lady thought that, as the captain of the knights, he should certainly know the saint better than anyone else. Efna decided to tell she heard the news. A new saint was recently chosen. About 4 months have passed since then, and since it was she who the real villain tried to kill, the heroine had to understand what kind of person the saint was. She intended to sweeten the captain's words so that he would never see in her a person plotting to murder the honorable lady. Johann answered honestly, "This girl is incredibly kind to all people on the planet and smiles very often. One could also say about the saint that she is quite romantic, and as if she had flown in from a completely different planet." The heroine thought so. This girl must be simply amazing, because the work of a saint is incredibly difficult. Before the lady could finish these words, the carriage wheel hit a large stone, and the heroes were unable to sit in their seats from the force of the impact. The teacher was jerked forward so sharply that she didn't even have time to grab onto anything. And as soon as the carriage began to shake, the heroine seemed to find herself again in that tragic moment when she died in the accident. It pierced her heart so sharply and painfully that the girl couldn't even breathe or answer the captain. It was like a fit of intense despair at some point. The heroine didn't even understand what time she was in. To help the girl return to reality as quickly as possible, Johann looked into her eyes and tried to calm her down in a quiet voice. He spoke each word slowly and confidently, assuring her that she would definitely be okay. Efna asked for forgiveness with tears in her eyes. She felt too uncomfortable, but she really felt very sick in the carriage. The teacher burst into tears, and that was the very moment when it was no longer possible to contain her feelings and accumulated emotions. Johann again asked her to take a deep breath to calm her nervous system as quickly as possible. His words really helped the girl calm down, and if it weren't for this young man, she would have long ago been overcome by real panic. She felt incredible care and support from a person she didn't know at all. In that moment, she allowed herself to be sincere, real, and not at all afraid of judgment. Efna's words were unnecessary here. It was enough to simply be there, to radiate the calm that Efna so needed right now. The road turned out to be endless, and finally the crowd reported their arrival at the Imperial Palace. With tears in their eyes, the people looked out the window and saw a huge, incredibly luxurious palace. A spark of gratitude towards the captain flashed in her eyes, full of fear and doubt. She smiled slightly, and Johann realized that his presence was actually helping her, and this small victory gave him the strength to continue. The lady quickly got out of the carriage, and she was sure that it was very rude on her part, and she had definitely made a serious mistake. Johann just continued to smile sweetly, asking if the teacher had any business at the Imperial Palace. Before she had time to think about how to spend her time, a respectable gentleman approached the girl and greeted the teacher on her arrival. This young man's name was Viscount Chupin, and he had arrived specifically on assignment to help the guest conduct the inspection. The lady thanked the young man for his hard work even on weekends, and she, like no one else, understood how bitter it was. She suggested first looking at the recreation area, since for children this was the most important thing at their early age. The recreation area was adjacent to a luxurious garden, which had no high steps or sharp ornaments, making it ideal and safe for children. Within the luxurious garden was a greenhouse with rare plants, and it could also be ideal for educational purposes. The teacher wanted to look around a little more slowly, and the gentleman offered to take her pass and look around so that she would be more comfortable. The Viscount still had a lot of other work to do, and even on his days off he worked tirelessly. The teacher's pass only allowed her to be here, and her attention was drawn to a separate palace, which was often used for Soviet events. After examining the area, the teacher found the fountain dangerous, and the children definitely needed to be kept as far away from it as possible. On the other hand, he might be incredibly popular with the kids if they see him. As the teacher carefully examined the area, she thought she would have a wonderful day, but suddenly she saw someone. Her ex-fiancé, Hardness, was heading straight towards her, having been caught with his younger sister. The gentleman in snow-white gloves whispered the name of Lady Efna, and his thoughts had been occupied only with her for a long time. In front of the gentleman lay a man with his hands tied, asking for mercy and to be released as quickly as possible. The gentleman in the snow-white gloves was Johann, and he had no doubt that the saint had gone off to write another novel. The young man from whom he tried to get the truth insisted that he really did not have any information. Johann didn't want to listen to his whining any longer and ordered him to be removed as far away from his sight as possible. The young man sighed and declared that every day he saw only such trash, and there were no decent people left in his circle. Every day he was haunted by a strange, deep feeling, a sense of global emptiness that he could not get rid of. On the one hand, this feeling seemed frightening to him, but on the other hand, it was incredibly attractive. The ex-husband hadn't changed at all. He was still impudent and muttered something as soon as he saw the teacher. There were rumors that serious troubles had arisen at the Marquise's house, and Efna believed that this was indeed the case. She felt incredibly uncomfortable being around this man, and she prayed that he would remove his stupid expression as soon as possible. Hardness, and in a menacing voice, the teacher asked the man who had a huge black hole instead of a heart to never come near her again. The young man did not understand why she was acting so carefree after she had dared to brazenly run away from home. He offered to go back with her and beg the Count for forgiveness, while Efna was about to count to 3 and run away, never to see the eyes of this impudent liar again. The young man suggested shouting something loudly, but the heroine understood that he definitely intended to do something new. After slowly counting to 3, Efna simply turned around and ran as fast as she could, wherever her eyes looked. But before she had time to run far, her path was suddenly blocked by her younger sister, who was no worse than her ex-husband. Lillian still looked angelically beautiful, and it was impossible to even think that this sweet girl could deceive anyone. In a pleasant, sweet voice, she asked how her beloved little sister, whom they had not seen for a long time, was doing. She also turned her attention to Hardness, and now at last the trio was fully assembled. Efna decided to walk past her sister and noticed that she had even managed to ignore her just now. And Lillian really did go to Hardness first and confess that she had to go through so many problems to get out of the temple and see him. As soon as the heroine heard the conversation about the temple, she noticed her sister's clothes and cross. And she couldn't find an explanation for why Lillian had recently started wearing clothes from the temple. The lady confessed to Hardness that she had been so busy during the saint's period of purification that it meant she had indeed returned from the temple. The so-called period of adaptation for a new saint was called the period of purification, when the lady prepared to appear at the temple. Perhaps the teacher still didn't know much about her little sister, and her sweet smile hid too many lies. She turned to Efna and told her that she had recently been chosen as a new saint, and that it was a great honor for her. If you think about it, Lillian became a saint, which means that in the original, Efna tried to kill her half-sister. The heroine's head was in complete disarray, and the first thing she needed to do was put her thoughts in order as quickly as possible. She didn't care at all as long as her ex-fiancé was shouting that the lady clearly didn't understand how many problems he had been in after her disappearance. Hardness stated that the lady was behaving absolutely recklessly, and the family business she managed alone spoke volumes. Efna called her ex-lover an impudent extortionist who clearly wants to get into the court of the aristocrats. The young man continued to insist that he was her legal fiancé, and did she really think that her stupid plan would really work? He grabbed the lady by the shoulders, assuring her that she would once again fail completely, but this time help was incredibly quickly at hand. In front of the impudent man stood a respectable gentleman who knew that Efna had long since broken up with this man, but he was still bothering her. The young man stated that the Marquis looked full of energy after sleeping during the Council of Aristocrats, and now he was demonstrating his strength in this way. The brazen deceiver did not expect anyone to oppose his behavior, but he certainly would not be able to cope with a person with a much higher title. The gentleman inquired whether, despite the fact that the saint should be busy at this time, she seemed to have too much free time, and whether the temple was in complete disarray. Lillian asked the master to forgive them, realizing that they had only acted this way because they saw their precious sister. Her words did not sound very sincere, and the gentleman immediately understood how they really felt about the teacher. Suddenly, the little sister declared that she adored Efna incredibly and valued their relationship very much. It was the worst-case scenario for a kindergarten teacher, and Efna knew it all too well. The gentleman admitted that in order to see the teacher, he had to beg her and run around like crazy. Hardness continued to insist that he needed to settle matters with his ex-fiancée first, and he was going to take her with him. In this case, the young man asked to state his position loudly and clearly in order to finally understand the current situation. He tried to mumble something, but his voice was so quiet that the gentleman could not hear anything at all. Hardness insisted that Lady Efna belonged only to him, and this concerned his personal family life. The honorable gentleman didn't care at all because he had just seen how rudely this deceiver dared to treat the girl. He didn't argue with his savior for long and, cowering in anger, hissed that now everything was absolutely unimportant. The gentleman was sure that the Marquis would not be able to tell him anything, and he was simply convinced that everything was fine with the girl. He warned that they had a preliminary agreement with their teacher and would like to speak with her personally. The young man reminded her that the lady had promised that they would definitely do something together, but unfortunately, Efna could not remember anything like that. Strange words came from the young man's mouth. We promised to do it together, and he definitely couldn't have come up with this. Finally, the teacher remembered. It was about a home visit, because of this time she was actually able to forget it. Now she had to go back, and she was not at all prepared for such a change in plan. The sun was still shining very high and brightly, but the teacher definitely didn't want to waste any more of the precious daylight of her only day off. The gentleman asked again whether she really needed to leave urgently, and whether she had absolutely no time. Efna wished she could keep her promise, but unfortunately she really didn't have that opportunity right now. While they were chatting pleasantly with each other, the ex-fiancé looked with hatred at their free and sincere communication. Still, he could not contain his anger and shouted he had no other choice but to tell Count Wendister everything. The teacher didn't care at all what else this fool was going to do, and she was even ready for him to tell his father everything. She asked if the young man really thought she would continue to help save his sinking business. The teacher was incredibly grateful to the gentleman for his help, while her ex-fiancé continued to shout something after her. The younger sister also stayed with hardness, and finally it was no longer possible to hide the terrible truth and stupid deception. The lady congratulated her sister on being made a saint, and she gave her blessing to Hardness without hesitation. Apparently, he would clearly need it more, but now Efna was no longer going to tolerate impudent lies behind her back. The gentleman suggested going to the greenhouse, as it was already becoming unbearably cold outside. A very cool wind blew, and a small pink petal fell right in front of Lillian's feet. This small, delicate petal looked like her beloved little sister, with whom she would definitely never have the same relationship again. Lillian understood perfectly well that one day the truth would definitely be revealed, and her sister would learn about her cruel lie. She wasn't at all prepared to let her little sister get away with it again, and Lillian couldn't allow her to treat her like that. The heroes went to a cozy, warm greenhouse, and this place was incredibly beautiful. They say that if lovers come to this greenhouse, their love will last forever. The young man decided to ask the teacher if it was awkward when the excursion location suddenly changed to the Imperial Palace. The teacher said that she even had to work overtime, and the emperor was grateful that she so willingly agreed. And since the young man wanted to say this from the very beginning, it was not even worth asking. This could be called exhaustion of her weak and pitiful body. The teacher could not sleep, could not eat, and did nothing but work. The emperor clearly did not expect to hear such a frank confession, and that the teacher took her work so seriously. The young man could not understand whether this fragile girl was really so fearless or simply too self-confident. Perhaps she should have been more careful with her boldness in the conversation, but the teacher had no intention of hiding anything. She asked the emperor if there was another reason why he insisted on a tour of the Imperial Palace. As it turned out, there really was something else going on here, and there was some reason after all. And in the opinion of the gentleman, this reason is very important for him, and almost of primary importance. 2 years ago, around this time, little Maxian was almost killed, but fortunately, everything turned out well. The carriage in which the boy was riding passed through the Aquilin Lake Park, and unfortunately, that evening his fate was to end tragically. When the emperor told about the lakes and the park, the teacher realized that this was the park they had originally intended to hold the excursion in. The young man smiled and said that perhaps if he were there again, he would have a real fit. 2 years ago, little Maxian was only 3 years old, and even the teacher was angry about it, and it was impossible to imagine what emotions the gentleman was experiencing. Perhaps the gentleman's actions could be considered selfish. He changed the place without warning, and he was even ready to take a blow from the fragile lady. Smiling, he offered his right cheek and offered to hit the teacher for such a reckless act. Efna couldn't even imagine that she could hit someone, even if it was just a joke. The teacher laughed and asked if she could hit with her palm or her fist, and put her right hand forward. The gentleman certainly didn't expect such a belligerent response, because he was sure the teacher would simply shut up and become embarrassed. The gentleman burst out laughing, but Efna warned him that she had just asked a very serious question, and the young man's behavior was completely inappropriate here. Their conversation was going quite smoothly, and the lady decided to ask a little more about the boy Maxian. The gentleman even managed to cry from laughter, and he was ready with pleasure to discuss all the issues regarding the young gentleman. Quite a few aristocrats looked at Maxian with disapproval, and for aristocrats who covet the throne, the symbol of power is like an uninvited guest. As expected from a first-class teacher, the girl hit the nail on the head, and indeed it turned out to be so. It must have been very difficult for the gentleman and the little boy. The young man wondered if she felt even a little sympathy for him. Efna only had sympathy for those who were naturally weak and sweet, and the honorable gentleman was definitely not on that list. The young man smiled and casually asked the lady not to treat him too lightly, and for the emperor, who was eavesdropped on by rats day and night, a small corner of the meeting room would be enough. The teacher was surprised that the young man really wanted to visit the meeting room when he should be worrying about the future of the empire. Besides, talking about rats and the like is a rather dark topic for a kindergarten. Efna allowed the gentleman to be present on one condition: if he received the director's permission, and if he came, she would even treat him to a cup of tea. The morning at the kindergarten was quite calm today, and the children were happily listening to their favorite teacher's new assignments. Today, Efna was planning to give a fascinating tour of the fragrant greenhouse. At the same time, the heroine was both happy and sad. The excursion could be long, and she needed to check every time that no one was tired. She lined the children up in 2 neat rows and happily announced that from that moment, their exciting adventure began. The children's cheerful eyes twinkled with light, and none of them had ever been in a huge, real greenhouse before. The children entered the large greenhouse and were delighted. The air here was thick and humid, filled with the aromas of exotic flowers and damp earth. Sunbeams streamed through the glass roof, creating a kaleidoscope of light and shadow on the lush vegetation. There were huge, rare flowers here, and inside the greenhouse there was also a small fountain with butterflies hovering around it. The teacher began to talk about beautiful and amazing plants that should never be harmed. The kids answered the lady's questions correctly, and if only the kids behaved as well as they answered, the teacher would have been out of work long ago. Suddenly, little Malin fell right into the mud in her fancy dress while running around, and Maxian fell into the pond during a fight with Malin. His clothes were soaked through the shed, because the boy was sitting right in the fountain. But that was not all, and young Mr. Bante ate so much chocolate that his mouth turned black. The teacher would be incredibly happy if she had 6 hands instead of 2, but even 1,000 hands would not be enough to cope with these children. She quickly changed Malin into some spare, clean clothes and carefully dried Maxian's head with a fluffy towel. All that remains is to wipe the young gentleman's chocolate-smeared mouth, and finally all the children will be completely fine. Finally, the long-awaited lunch arrived, and the teacher breathed a sigh of relief, feeling tired. She needed to finish watching the children's lunch first. Only after that could she have a snack herself. The teacher kept a close eye on the children and never took her eyes off any of them, like a responsible teacher. Suddenly, a young Mr. Maxian approached her, holding a strange black box in his hands. He turned to the teacher and excitedly stated that Malin had suddenly disappeared and he could not find her anywhere. Malin said she wanted to take it into the water because of her bag. She still hasn't returned for lunch. Maxian couldn't find the girl anywhere and decided that he had to tell the teacher about it as soon as possible. All this time, Efna was sure that all the children were in their places, but indeed, Malin was completely nowhere to be found. The lady decided to immediately go in search of help, and fortunately the Viscount was passing by near the greenhouse. Efna shouted his name loudly, and the young man immediately stopped, turning his attention to the teacher. He knew perfectly well that there was to be a children's excursion today, and he was sure that the teacher would be busy. But Efna screamed excitedly. She needed the help of the Imperial Knights, and something terrible happened. Efna's emotions were difficult to express in words, and the lady, in despair, told how a child had suddenly disappeared during an excursion. The Viscount certainly didn't expect that something like this could happen on an ordinary children's excursion. He promised to inform the knights of what had happened as soon as possible, while the teacher ran around the grounds of the Imperial Palace and tried to find the missing little girl. She shouted her name loudly and really hoped that the girl would respond as soon as possible, but unfortunately she heard only silence in response. It was completely unclear where the baby could have disappeared to in such a short time, but there could be dangerous plants in the greenhouse. Once the teacher thought about this, she decided that she should probably go back. The next second, panic gripped her even more next to the fountain. In the water, the teacher saw something in the distance that looked like a child's shoe. Just recently, the kids were actually playing near the fountain, and the teacher immediately thought of the worst. Trying to see something in the depths of the fountain, Efna only prayed that the little girl would not drown. She was already ready to jump into the water to check that the girl really was not in the fountain. The teacher continued to shout loudly, hoping that the little girl would hear her and give at least some kind of signal. Panic gripped the lady so much that she did not understand at all what was happening, but she stopped when she felt someone's touch on her shoulder. It was Captain Johann, who managed to pull the girl by the waist before she frantically threw herself into the fountain. Efna was sure that the girl should be there, but Johann loudly asked the teacher to come to her senses. She didn't expect to see Johann at that moment, who for some reason was there again to help her. The teacher, with tears in her eyes, said that it seemed the little girl had fallen into the water and they had to hurry to save her. The next second, Johan asked the lady to look more closely, because all this time the panic had simply been deceiving her. She was sure that all this time she had been looking at a child's boot, which was slowly rocking on the water. As soon as the heroine took a closer look, she realized that it was not a child's shoe, but an ordinary dried leaf. The fog seemed to clear before the teacher's eyes, and she finally saw reality, not overwhelmed by madness. As if that wasn't enough, the heroine thought for a moment that she had completely lost her mind. She didn't even check properly. Her consciousness was as if in another reality, and in fact everything turned out to be different. The teacher was incredibly worried she should have been more attentive and was ready to take responsibility to ensure that Maylin returned safely. She couldn't even imagine that right now there could be a girl, and it's quite possible that she could be in great danger. Johan suggested to the worried lady that they look for the girl together, and perhaps his words might sound impolite. Just now, the teacher looked like a small child who was left alone by the water. Efna was ready to trust this man to take care of her, because her dear guardian always helped her in difficult situations. Even now, when he should be more excited than anyone, Johan was incredibly calm. Efna decided that she needed to come to her senses as soon as possible, and there was absolutely no time for worry. The enormous plant, as if awakening from a centuries-long sleep, suddenly came to life. Its thick, gnarled trunk trembled, and thick, fleshy tentacles burst from its crown, as if from a nightmarish tangle of snakes. The captain reacted with lightning speed, and the next second the teacher was free from the insidious tentacles of the magical plant. This is a scream of horror caught in the girl's throat, but this was not the first time the captain had encountered something like this. And what was the lady's surprise when, on one of the huge tentacles, she saw little Maylin, who was alive, healthy, and incredibly happy. The girl she had been looking for and worrying about all this time was at the very top of the magical plant. The little girl seemed completely unaware of the danger she was in, and Johan was determined to deal with the magical creatures as quickly as possible. This plant was a parasite, it fed on divine power, and it was unknown what harm it could cause to the child. Naturally, the stronger the divine power, the worse the compatibility, which is why the plant so easily replaced the baby, but in the original it appeared only in the middle of the plot. Efna said that this plant uses people's weakness to bewitch them, and a person with powerful powers is even more vulnerable. And the chances of the captain being bewitched are much higher than those of little Maylin, who is still just a child. The little girl happily hugged the magical plant and was sure that it would not harm her. But Johan wasn't so sure about that, because after all, we were talking about a magical creature that couldn't be influenced. He decided that in any case he needed to save the girl before a terrible tragedy happened. This was not the first time Johan had dealt with magical creatures, and he had a special sword for such occasions. Captain Johan, his face hardened, rushed forward like an enraged element. Johan knew that there was very little time left. The roots of the monster, like giant steel cables, fettered Maylin, and the plant itself pulled her towards its ominous flower mouths, foreshadowing imminent death. With every step Johan took, the magical plant in his hand grew brighter, as if it sensed his determination, his unwavering will to save an innocent life. With a hiss and a crackle, the darkness began to recede, giving way to light, the roots that had been wrapped around Maylin loosening their grip. During the attack, Johan managed to turn around and ask the girl what her next steps would be if he was ultimately defeated in disgrace. Is she willing to stay and watch this, or would she rather run away and not have to see this chaos? The captain was definitely not prepared to be defeated in a fight with a magical plant, but on the other hand, he didn't want the teacher to see it. She couldn't even imagine how she could help Johan, since only he had knightly skills, and only he can deal with the huge magical plant and save the innocent little girl. Silence reigned in the greenhouse, broken only by Maylin's quiet sobs and the captain's heavy breathing. A swipe of razor-sharp mind, a decision, and his enchanted weapon, a sword woven from moonlight and stardust, cut through the air. Johan's blade slid with impeccable precision, cutting through the stems like brittle reeds, every blow calculated, every swing filled with determination and courage. The stems of the magical plant, writhing ominously near the little girl, did not even have time to realize their fate. Maylin, engrossed in the sight of the wondrous butterflies fluttering among the exotic flowers, was blissfully unaware of the danger that threatened her. And only the teacher understood that in just a couple of seconds the girl could fall to a tremendous height. At that moment, before she had time to think, the teacher's body somehow began to move on its own. She pushed off with both feet and seemed to find herself in zero gravity, trying to reach the little girl's hand. Finally, Malin was safe in Efna's arms, and for the first time, the teacher felt a strength she had never felt before. The teacher held her tightly in her arms and tried to get to a safe place so that the little girl would not be in any further danger. Suddenly, little Malin fell asleep right in her arms, probably because the effect of the divine power had finally worn off. As soon as Johann managed to deal with the magical plant, he immediately ran to Efna and the baby to make sure they were okay. Johann had a huge responsibility on his shoulders as he bravely fought the magical plant. Now he could finally breathe a sigh of relief, confident that the baby was no longer in any danger. The girl was already fast asleep in the lady's arms, while huge drops of tears were streaming down Efna's face. The tension finally eased, and the teacher was unable to control her strong emotions and experiences. Perhaps it was a bit silly of her, as if she had done something special, but Efna was incredibly happy right now. Her heart, which had been beating wildly just a minute ago, was now calming down, filled with a warm feeling of relief. It was thanks to his courage and determination that Malin was now safe. The captain noticed that it looked like the lady had managed to injure her arm, but the teacher was more worried about Johann himself. The young man was absolutely fine, and his face was lit up with a happy, joyful smile. The captain decided to prove that after one event in his life, he could be afraid of little. One day the captain received a deep wound from a sword, but even after that he was able to heal himself and survived. The young man warned that if his treatment was poor, he was ready to be punished, and asked to show the girl's wound again. The teacher didn't care at all that she had been injured, and she was most worried about other people. There was a huge purple bruise on her fragile wrist, and Johann was sure it needed to be treated right away. A yellow magical light illuminated the room, and Johann used his magical power to try to help the girl. He saw clearly how the teacher covered a huge distance with just one jump to catch the little girl before she fell. And the captain wondered if he had really seen with his own eyes the manifestation of the Count's family's talent. With the help of magical power, he managed to quickly heal the wound, and she no longer felt pain. Literally at that very second, people's voices were heard, and some man and some knights were running straight towards them. The excited man, seeing the girl, was glad that she was safe and sound. Her father turned out to be a high priest named Havis, and as soon as the baby heard her father's voice, she immediately woke up. Johann told his father that he didn't have to worry, that the girl was perfectly fine, and that there was no need to kneel in this chaos. Havis warned the little girl. He told her never to go far from the teacher, but the girl dared to disobey him. Malin muttered something about her mommy calling her to eat cookies, and they even sang happy songs together. The little girl was sure that her mother was singing the song, and she was incredibly happy that they were together. The father began to hug his daughter and began to cry bitterly, realizing that she definitely could not see her mother now. The captain said that the same thing happened at the lake, when his mother died on one of the most terrible days. Now Efna knew very well that a terrible tragedy had once happened in Captain Johann's life. That is why, driven by his feelings, he immediately rushed to the teacher to save her when she was standing near the water. At that moment, Johann looked incredibly scared, although in reality the captain was not that kind of person at all. The baby's father did not understand how these people in the palace allowed a monster, a magical plant, to roam within the walls of the imperial palace. The situation was truly too serious, so the man decided to request a personal audience with the emperor and tell him that something similar had happened. And everyone understood perfectly well that only thanks to the responsible teacher, this child was not harmed and was quickly saved. The heroine's clothes and hair dried instantly, and all this was only thanks to the amazing and divine power. The teacher greeted the gentleman, Malin's father, a man named Havis Desat. Efna still felt guilty, but Havis assured her that no one could prevent the attraction of the magical evil plant. The high priest confidently declared that from now on, if it concerned the kindergarten or Efna's teacher personally, he was ready to support her in everything. Efna wanted to tell her something else about the magic plant, but the captain patted her on the shoulder and signaled her not to say anything unnecessary. The teacher immediately realized that the high priest probably shouldn't know some information, and that it was necessary to discuss it with Johann first. In that case, what she read about in the second part of the novel about the saint could definitely happen, but now she needed help. The heroine's sly smile, which must not be shown, appeared on the teacher's face, and even Johann immediately noticed it. The father, embracing his daughter with trepidation, warned that he was going to go home, as the girl had experienced a lot of stress today. Havs warned that if the teacher suddenly felt even the slightest discomfort, she should immediately go to the hospital. Finally, Efna breathed a sigh of relief. The baby was saved and was now safe, under the care of her beloved father. The teacher needed to return to the children as soon as possible because she had been absent for too long. Suddenly, behind her, she heard a man's voice calling her Vendester, and the heroine was surprised who would call her by her old name. Now was not the time for Efna to date anyone, and she was most worried about the children she had left behind. Turning around, the lady immediately caught her breath in surprise because there really was someone behind her. This voice was so unpleasant to her that Efna just wanted to run away from there as quickly as possible and never hear it again. Because her impudent brother stood in front of her and asked how the girl dared to appear in the garden of the imperial palace. Efna greeted her brother politely, but decided to clear something up with him first so that he wouldn't ask any more stupid questions. She said that she had been here all this time and had not appeared unexpectedly, and that the one who had suddenly appeared like the devil in a snuff box was only her brother. The young man laughed and stated that the girl had become more arrogant since their last meeting. The villain grabbed his sister by the collar of her dress and probably wanted to hit her, and everything happened exactly the same way as in her childhood. The brother declared that the girl had completely lost her mind and dared to talk to him like he was trash. Captain Johan, a tall and broad-shouldered warrior, turned out to be the embodiment of unshakable strength and justice, and the brother, taken aback, let go of the collar of Efna's dress and took a step back. The brother asked what brought the captain here, since he had just seen a lot with his own eyes, but he came here to deal with the pests. Johan said ominously, "It looks like there is a pest on the hand of the impudent young gentleman that needs to be dealt with." Finally, the lady was no longer in danger, and her brother slowly removed his hand, which had been squeezing her throat just a few seconds ago. Every movement of the captain breathed irreversibility, and the teacher's ex-husband understood that his actions were no longer necessary. Johan smiled politely and offered to walk the girl home while the teacher went to find the children, who had been alone the whole time. Johan extended his hand in a snow-white glove, showing the lady his respect and sincere intentions. Somewhere deep down, Efna felt that this man was different from the rest, and she gladly accepted his offer. The next day was a beautiful, warm day, and Efna decided she should definitely go for a walk and do some shopping at the same time. Stopping near one of the shops, she wondered what would be the best substitute for felt paper for crafts in her classes. While the teacher was looking at the goods with interest, someone nearby started shouting, and it definitely sounded like an unpleasant quarrel. Efna looked around and saw Duke Hayden Hildebon himself standing nearby, but it was strange what he was doing here at such a time. Efna continued to look at the gentleman, wondering why he appeared here, but she hardly heard what these people were saying. The man standing next to him was clearly angry, claiming that his shop had no problems and they weren't doing any bad things. Apparently the Duke didn't like something about this man's work, so he decided to come personally and resolve all the problems. The gentleman simply came on a beautiful day to buy a gift for his wife, but this merchant was so unpleasant that the gentleman was ready to simply tear out his deaf ears. The man assured that if the Duke came here with his wife, then he would believe him, but otherwise his words sounded like empty chatter. Unfortunately, Efna was too close to this situation, and the brothers merchant paid attention to her and thought that she was the Duke's wife. Efna was scared, having just been caught eavesdropping, but she had no choice but to act as if nothing had happened. She pretended that she was just passing by, and did not understand at all why the merchant decided to pay attention to her. Taking advantage of the moment, the gentleman confidently declared that the merchant was absolutely right, and this girl was his real wife. It turned out that the merchant was not so easy to deceive. He was sure that the gentleman was continuing to lie, because the Duke himself was dressed pretentiously and formally, and his young companion is walking around the city in a shabby dress, which is completely illogical for an aristocratic family. Be that as it may, the teacher was annoyed to admit it, but the merchant was right, and even the Duke had absolutely nothing to say in response to his words. The gentleman still kept his hand on the girl's shoulder, because now it was important to him that the merchant believed him. The Duke angrily declared that the man was not only brazenly staring at someone else's wife, but also dared to brazenly wag his stupid tongue. The gentleman addressed Efna with snowy words that he was incredibly upset, and she realized that now she would have to play some new role. The Duke admitted that their father had bought these clothes especially for this reason, and that is why the girl continues to wear them as a memory of her family. Efna immediately realized that she had to play along with the Duke, and happily announced that this beautiful dress had actually been bought by her father. And supposedly, one day the man pulled out his sick body and went out into the city for the last time to buy a dress for his beloved daughter. The heroes played their roles perfectly. The Duke asked if it wouldn't be easier to shoot the merchant, but Efna asked the fake husband not to go that far. Suddenly, a familiar man approached the merchant and warned him that he needed to run because a search was about to begin. After these words, the merchant had no choice but to insult, and turning around with lightning speed, he ran away from the Duke. It looks like these people will have to move their shelter again because they were just caught red-handed once again. I immediately asked if the teacher was okay, because she certainly didn't expect that right now she would have to play the beloved of a respectable gentleman. On the one hand, Efna was too carried away while watching everything that was happening, and now she was thinking about only one thing: are these people really doing bad things? The teacher warned that if this matter was confidential or something like that, she was good at keeping secrets. Usually, when it comes to privacy, people pretend they haven't seen anything, but unfortunately, the Duke admitted that strange things have really started happening here lately. These people, with noble intentions, seemed to the teacher to be mad villains who did not know what they were doing. The Duke admitted that this was not all that had happened, and it was said that traders were using May stones as currency. Mayu stones were a rare mineral from the duchy that was used exclusively in magical engineering. Now it seemed like a real secret. The gentleman warned that this information must be kept secret. Before rumors spread that the Duke was sponsoring the merchants, the young man was sure that it was necessary to better wipe the magic stones from the face of the earth. Indeed, if minerals from the Duchy of Hildeban are used in such matters, the only option is to destroy and dispose of them as quickly as possible. The gentleman uttered a strange phrase. He was going to wipe the magic stones off the face of the earth, as if he intended to destroy the entire planet. This was clearly beyond the good-natured teacher's understanding, and she had no idea how it could be done. Come to think of it, the Duke was indeed right, and one day her genuine curiosity could clearly be her undoing. The teacher behaved so sincerely that the Duke, who was accustomed to lying aristocrats, could not help but notice it. Something incredibly sweet and warm emanated from this girl. The young man had never felt anything like it before. She behaved like a little child and looked at this life, full of danger and the unknown, with childish interest. The young man said quietly. The girl looked incredibly funny, and finally he could feel free for the first time. Life in the kindergarten was in full swing and was incredibly noisy from early morning. The road to the garden today was much more tiring and noisier than usual, and it all happened for one simple reason. Today, the little one's parents arrived at the kindergarten, and even the majestic and imposing emperor appeared with the young gentleman. The teacher wondered if the emperor really had so much free time that he could come on an ordinary day to support little Maxian. Since it was an incredibly long-awaited day for the kindergarten, the teacher was a little worried, but fortunately, the event was well organized. The children were incredibly happy because their parents were heading to kindergarten with them today for exciting activities. The teacher was confident that the children and parents would definitely succeed if they didn't get nervous. And now that everyone was finally assembled, seated in their places and calmed down, Efna was ready to tell why they had gathered here today. The teacher loudly proposed to assign roles for the first play of the semester, and every time it was a grand event for the kindergarten. Casting roles for a play was always a fun activity for the teacher because it was a moment when the children could bond with their parents. Every time the kids were incredibly delighted with all this, but for the parents it was always a war in which the pride of the aristocrat was at stake. The kindergarten used a rather unique method of assigning roles. The teacher would set the topic. The children gave a presentation, and the one who received the most votes became the main character. Efna prepared to agree on this year's main theme, which was written on the board under the red curtain. The teacher solemnly waved the red cloth, and on the board was the only inscription, "I love." One of the ladies exclaimed that this was the very topic that was predicted at the Salon for Mothers, and in 5 years the children had to prepare presentations on this topic. Wherever you go, people are the same, and some mothers were sure that the maternity salon was full of useful information. Initially, the children's play faced a strong negative reaction, as aristocrats are not supposed to just sing and dance. The kids who played the leading roles always ended up as student council presidents after entering the academy. As a result, this event later became an arena of fierce competition leading to entrance exams. Since the teacher had to start classes, she suggested that the parents go home, while she herself and the children were going to go to class. The children's parents were puzzled by the upcoming event, and everyone wanted their child to become the main character. It took Efna a full 3 hours to prepare for the presentation, but it only took about 3 minutes to complete once the topic was announced. The young gentleman immediately wanted to take part in the play, but he was incredibly scared of being the main character. Johann admitted that if the little girl becomes the main character, she will definitely look like a real princess. The girl was not a member of the imperial family, but on the other hand, the little one had enough talent and ability to become a wonderful heiress. Despite the fact that the teacher had long ago asked the parents to leave the room, the boys still continued to argue among themselves. Efna addressed the children, inviting them all to go to an interesting lesson in class right now. Young Mr. Bante told the teacher that his brother had promised to give him 20 chocolates if he could become the main character. The children still had a long and interesting journey ahead of them, and the teacher was confident that each of them would succeed. The next day, Efna went to the store to pick out suitable costumes for the play, and she wished she could find a better salesperson than the one she knew. Efna went to a store looking for children's clothing and politely greeted the merchants. And what was her surprise when she heard the sharp sound of a slap in the children's store. Indeed, 2 aristocrats were standing in a children's store, shouting loudly, trying to figure out whose child should become the main character. And these were not ordinary girls, but the parents of children from the teacher's class, whom she immediately recognized. The ladies continued to argue about whose child was the best, and each tried to insult the other. The grown ladies argued just like 2 little girls who couldn't share their favorite toy. So the teacher decided to intervene, but unfortunately she didn't notice that one of the girls had already raised her hand to hit the other. Efna appeared next to her at the most inopportune second to try to resolve their dispute, but the next moment she was flying to the floor. Only a miracle could save the girl who ended up in a fantasy novel, in whose place there was an ordinary girl named Efna. Finding herself nearby at the wrong moment, the teacher received a strong slap from the girl, who immediately recognized Lady Efna. The parents were worried because one of the ladies actually hit the teacher hard, who just wanted to help them. Good-natured Efna declared that she was perfectly fine and that her parents had no reason to worry, despite the fact that drops of blood were flowing from her nose. The aristocrats were seriously frightened when they saw the blood, while the teacher assured them that she was completely fine. The teacher never expected that the grown-up parents would behave like little children, trying to take each other's place. Unfortunately, a children's performance that should bring joy and happiness has turned into a battlefield with insane competition. So now, seeing the awkward situation between the 2 girls, the teacher decided to consider canceling the play so that something like this would not happen again. Upon hearing the proposal, the ladies asked the teacher not to cancel the performance under any circumstances so that their children would have the opportunity to become student council president. Blood was still slowly trickling from the teacher's nose, and she wondered if the ladies were going to continue like this. Given the seriousness of the situation, the girls realized how wrong they were and promised never to quarrel again, making up that very second. The children are looking forward to this event. Efna warned that she is not ready to cancel the grand celebration because of such a small problem. The teacher warned the girls again, and they, in turn, promised to be friends with each other, and now the lady understood why the children behaved well after returning from kindergarten. Efna was incredibly exhausted that day, and even one parent was tiring enough while working, and now she had to deal with several at once. She would have liked to go home and just relax, unwind, but today she absolutely had to find a good salesperson. The teacher was walking slowly down one of the side streets, and at one point something caught her attention. It was definitely a place that was already quite familiar to her, given the recent situations. It was the same building where she had called the Grand Duke Hildebond dear, and had heard that it was here that merchants did bad business. She was sure that the search of the market stall had long since ended, but for some reason, the most important thing was that the door was still open. Something prompted the teacher to stop, and the next second she heard a child's voice, and someone was definitely crying behind the door. Perhaps this could not have happened, and she simply imagined it, but she could not pass by and decided to go and check what was happening behind the mysterious door. The teacher slowly opened the wooden bolt because she was sure that she had just heard a child's voice from there. Having quietly examined the room, unfortunately, Efna did not understand what was happening and did not see anything strange here. As soon as she lowered her gaze to the floor, she realized that the room was indeed unusual, seeing a huge staircase in the floor leading down. Perhaps the heroine should call someone for help. It could be very urgent, but right now she felt that she had to figure it out herself. Slowly descending into the dark dungeon, the heroine realized she was in a basement. Between the stones on the wall, she saw the edge of a white paper and wondered where the small note had come from. It was too strange. Someone really stuck a small note between the stones, as if someone wanted this note to be read. Efna unfolded the piece of paper without thinking to read what was written, but when she unfolded it, she couldn't believe her eyes. On a small piece of paper was drawn a majestic cross that belonged to the Imperial Temple. Even the magic circle looked very suspicious here, and the teacher decided to take the mysterious note with her. The darkness swirled as if alive, obscuring the details in the depths of the room, but the details she could see terrified her. On one of the walls of the dungeon, blackened by time and dampness, hung handcuffs, the chains stretched to the floor, where frozen stains of dark burgundy, almost black, blood were visible. There was blood everywhere. The more the teacher tried to make out what she saw, the more scared she became. But suddenly, in the light of the lanterns, she saw a silhouette. She might need to run as fast as possible right now, but the girl felt as if someone was holding her ankles tightly. Her body did not move at all, no matter how much she tried to persuade herself to move at least a little. Right now, she felt like a stone rock. The young man came closer to her, and she noticed his snow-white hair, which she had definitely already seen in this novel. The gentleman sighed heavily, and today was too tiring for him because someone was interfering with his plans. The gentleman with snow-white hair turned out to be Captain Johann, who slowly took a cigar and inhaled the tobacco smoke. If there was anyone the heroine expected to see here, it certainly wasn't Johann, the good-natured gentleman who always helped her. His noble appearance was in no way compatible with this place, terrible, holding secrets that the teacher probably shouldn't know about. At first, the heroine was very scared, but as soon as she realized that Johann had approached her, she calmed down a little. On the other hand, it was strange to see him here, together in such a terrible place, where blood was visible everywhere on the floor. Johann politely informed her that he also did not expect to see the fragile teacher in such a place, which was quite mutual. The commander warned that it could be dangerous for an ordinary teacher here and offered to escort the girl out of this terrible place. Efna's complexion was not very good. She instantly turned pale as soon as she crossed the threshold of this evil dungeon. Probably Johann wanted to extend his hand to her, but out of fear the girl automatically pushed him away. Behind him was a terrible room, full of pain and despair, and now the teacher did not quite trust Mr. Johann. The lady said she was just looking for a clothing store, and while in that place, the gentleman could definitely turn his luxurious clothes into ordinary dust. All this time, Johann silently looked at the girl. She only prayed that he would say something as soon as possible. With each passing second, she felt more and more terrible, but looking into Johann's kind eyes, she hoped that it would soon end. The captain had warned her that there were many dangerous things here, and that people had been bought and sold here before, but Efna just wanted to see for herself that this place was truly finished. Johann admitted that he personally cleaned everything here, and it was no wonder why little Maylene enjoyed cleaning the classroom so much. But their occupations were radically different, and the mysterious captain was busy cleaning people here. Perhaps the captain would have been the one to turn this place into ruins, getting rid of the vile traitors. They were talking about terrible things, but for some reason the commander continued to smile so sweetly that on the one hand it scared the teacher a little. To his surprise, Johann quickly changed the subject and invited the teacher to look at the precious, luxurious box. Inside the box was a small statue of a horse, which slowly rotated to an incredibly pleasant melody. The teacher was sure that little Maylene would definitely like the precious box, which quickly attracted attention. The captain also hoped for this, and really wanted the girl to like his gift. Suddenly, an assistant approached him and reported that they had found escape routes for the escaped people who needed to be captured. The teacher had trouble hearing what the boys were saying, and it's possible that this might have something to do with the saint. She didn't hear a word, and the commander asked the assistant to finish the search as quickly as possible. It seemed like Johann couldn't take his eyes off her, and even offered to go with the girl right then and there. The young man stood there, spellbound, until Efna asked him again if he really wanted to go with her. Blood on the stone floor tiles, blood on the walls, spattered as if a mad artist had used scarlet as his only paint. Johann knew perfectly well that he still had too much to do in this terrible place, so he decided to simply wish the teacher a safe journey. His dark silhouette remained in this seedy place, and Efna decided to get out of there as quickly as possible. Johann probably buried other secrets in his life that the girls absolutely shouldn't know about. The teacher was so excited that she didn't even notice how she dropped one of the things. There was a folded piece of paper lying on the floor, and Johann unfolded it to see what was written there, and he immediately realized that the saint never ceased to amaze him. Time flowed inexorably, and finally the very day arrived for which the children and the teacher had been preparing for a long time. It was already the 7th day of overtime in a row, and purple circles were already starting to appear under the teacher's eyes. Soon all this must end, and the most important event for which she had been preparing for so long must take place right now. The teacher decided that she needed to try her best, and the children were also ready to take part in the performance. Despite being very tired, the teacher came out each time and warmly greeted the children. The children's parents eagerly awaited the start of the event, and each mother was confident that her child would win. Seeing the fighting spirit of everyone present, the teacher decided to begin announcing the roles for this year's children's play. The first to speak was a boy who talked about his favorite thing, the handkerchief his mother used to wipe his face since he was a baby. The young gentleman always carried this handkerchief with him and constantly thought about his mother, while in the hall the lady watched her son's magnificent performance. The teacher praised young Mr. Philip and asked the next student to come on stage. The next kindergarten student brought with him a large red apple, which he had already managed to grow himself. And if the end of the world came, the boy was confident that he would be able to plant this apple tree, and his performance was simply amazing. The teacher was happy. The children are pure and innocent. They do not belittle or envy the performances of other students. Every child was simply enjoying the event, and Efna was simply happy to see how happy the children were. Although 5-year-olds are easily distracted, these little ones listened attentively to their friends' performances, and it was deeply touching. The next to take the stage was young Mr. Bantade, who was incredibly nervous before his performance. It seemed that even the Grand Duke wanted the young gentleman to become the main character, and the teacher was incredibly interested in what the boy had already brought. He slowly put his hand in his pocket, preparing to take out his favorite thing that needed to be told. Efna had no idea what the young gentleman would tell her, because this boy was the most withdrawn of them all. The kids had to talk about their favorite thing, and the young gentleman proudly took a chocolate bar out of his pocket. The teacher was embarrassed, not understanding whether this was really the best that the young gentleman could choose. As it was like handing out hamburgers and choosing class president, and some things don't change no matter the time or place. The teacher asked the children to return to their seats and asked Maction if he was ready to present his speech. The proud boy walked onto the stage and confidently declared that his favorite thing was the people of the empire, and these were exemplary answers befitting a future prince. Malin was also looking forward to her performance, and after the young gentleman, it was the girl's turn. Come to think of it, the knight captain bought her a music box. It was so beautiful, and was it really the music box that the girl was going to show her? Efna was sure that the little girl would now show her the music box, but suddenly she reached out to it and admitted that she loved her sweet teacher more than anything in the world. The little girl hugged her beloved teacher with childish sincerity, and this meant that she didn't even intend to bring anything. It was incredibly sweet and touching. The teacher couldn't even contain her delighted emotions. The other children were outraged. Maylene did the wrong thing. Each of them liked the teacher incredibly, and now each child wanted to change their favorite thing. Efna was very touched by the children's touching behavior, but now she needed to calm them down as quickly as possible, and at this rate they could tear her to pieces. After some confusion, the main character was chosen by secret ballot of children, and finally it became the most solemn moment. The vote count had been successfully completed, and the teacher was preparing to announce the name of the child who would become the main character in this year's play. The parents held their breath in anticipation, and the children were incredibly eager to get the main role. No one could guess who would become that very best student, and the city teacher named the name of the young master Band-Aid. All this time, the boy was enthusiastically chewing a delicious sweet chocolate bar, and did not even expect that he would become the main character. At that moment, loud cries broke out in the hall. Philip wanted to be the main character, and was sure that he had the best performance. The teacher approached the child. It wasn't just the main character who shone in the play, but every child could shine just as brightly. Even villains can have charisma equal to the protagonist, but Philip was just a little kid who was now in despair. Efna confidently told Philip that he could also become a main character and that he didn't have to worry so much about it. Band-Aid himself admitted that he was incredibly scared and did not want to be the main character, and would gladly give up his place to Philip. Until now, not a single child had refused the role of the main character, and the teacher could not believe that the boy really did not want to be it. Philip didn't believe that the boy had actually given him the lead role, and the teacher had only asked him to thank his best friend. Thanks to Band-Aid's compliance, Philip was able to become the main character, and the teacher decided it was time to announce the actors for the other roles. Well, the young master who is destined to follow the path of a villain later can be so kind and sympathetic. Every day the teacher felt more and more oppressive fatigue, but she had absolutely no free time. Today, Efna even felt like she had so little strength left that she was ready to collapse right on the spot. In the morning, she played a game with the children where they had to draw a line on the floor and imagine that it was a narrow bridge with a full-flowing river flowing underneath. It was a simple warm-up to assess the children's acting skills and individuality, but some of the children's group started fighting again. Malin had another disagreement with Maxian, and these children were like two stubborn sheep. The teacher approached the children, again trying to separate them, but the strict rehearsal schedule with 5-year-olds, whose behavior is completely unpredictable, can be quite tiring. No matter how many years passed, Efna always experienced the torment of labor, but she pursued the main goal, to prepare for the event. Suddenly, an older girl named Aristia appeared in the group and approached Mr. Band-Aid. Aristia was going to take revenge on the boy for beating her in the vote for the role of the main character, while the young gentleman simply wanted to step aside. The teacher only prayed that the two would not start fighting, but Aristia was not at all ready to give in. The girl put her hand forward and said loudly that she had the young gentleman's favorite chocolate. The boy didn't see anything because, according to the girl, it was a special chocolate that only good children can see, and since Band-Aid can't see it, it means he's a bad child. This young lady persistently continued to stand on the white stripe and was sure that the boy simply had to give way to her. It was as if she was training him, and the young master quickly gave in because his kind heart could not do otherwise. He let the girl go ahead with all his pride, and at that moment he did not feel at all that he was losing. The young gentleman was trying so hard that he didn't notice at all how he lost his grip on the white strip and accidentally stumbled. Band-Aid collapsed to the floor the next second, and the brave young lady walked past him with a sense of victory. According to the rules of the game, this meant that the young gentleman fell straight into the water from the white stripe, and the teacher immediately rushed to save him. At that age, children often fell, and this was a natural process of growing up as a small child. While Efna was trying to calm the boy down, she felt that there was definitely someone right behind her. Turning around, she saw the venerable emperor, who had been watching their game the whole time. The teacher did not discuss anything in front of the children, and asked the emperor to go outside as quickly as possible to talk. She excitedly asked what brought the gentleman to the kindergarten and whether something had happened. Efna was worried that the sudden appearance of an adult in a children's group could frighten the children, even if it seemed rude on her part. The young man admitted that he was simply worried about the future of the empire, and there was nothing unusual about his visit. The emperor simply thought that if he cleared his head in the fresh air, he would be able to work better, and offered the teacher to treat him to a cup of tea. Efna was puzzled as to why the emperor was thinking about the future of the empire while in kindergarten, and that in itself sounded strange. She remembered the emperor had said something about a meeting room earlier and was about to think about security. Then the teacher herself promised that if the emperor visited the kindergarten, she would definitely treat him to a cup of tea. The emperor even managed to obtain permission from the director to visit the kindergarten, who readily agreed. Therefore, the teacher had no choice but to meet the emperor in the meeting room for a cup of tea as soon as the children finished their assignments. When she entered the office, the lady certainly didn't expect to see a huge selection of desserts from a famous salon, which is practically impossible to get, even if you stand in line all day. In fact, the emperor didn't really like sweets, so he made the girl happy by telling her that she could eat everything herself and not worry about anything. The teacher couldn't believe that it was her street that was celebrating, and she was ready to try the fragrant desserts with great pleasure. She wasn't even at all embarrassed by the presence of the venerable gentleman, because she definitely couldn't resist something sweet. The emperor asked if everything would be okay with her, since they might find out that they were spending time alone in the kindergarten. Of course, the honorable gentleman had enormous power and was ready to deal with any huge scandal. The teacher had already managed to take a bite of the delicious, airy dessert, but after these words she really became thoughtful. After all, the principal had issued the permit himself, and the other teachers had already gone home. The emperor suddenly noted that the chair he was sitting on was extremely uncomfortable, and that the kindergarten should certainly have more comfortable furniture. Caring Efna even offered to bring the emperor a spare chair, which was in the teacher's room. The emperor said he had come only to inspect a place he would visit often. One time would definitely not be enough to clarify all his thoughts, so the emperor warned the teacher that from now on, he would count on her help. Every day, the kindergarten teachers devoted a lot of energy to teaching, but there were times when some of them couldn't take it anymore and simply fainted. The lady was inundated with questions. There was a typo on all the invitations, and the workshop said they wouldn't be able to make the clothes on time. Efna's head was simply spinning from the number of tasks, and she also just wanted to faint from unbearable fatigue, and she just wanted to rest in a legal way that protected the rights of the worker. Efna knew that if she gave up now, the festival would be over, so she asked to contact the printing house, placed a new order with the workshop to get the costume on time, and also decided to revise the plan and adjust the schedule. Others saw the teacher as a simply incredible girl, just what was expected from one of the founders and pride of the kindergarten. The ladies were applauded by their colleagues, and no one was going to give up because of the overtime, and everyone just wanted to move forward to the festival. Efna was a sort of leader of the team, and she declared that her colleagues needed to give their all in order to hold the most magnificent festival. And so, despite one misfortune following another, time continued its course. One of the kindergarten teachers informed Efna that the stage props had just been prepared and that preparations for the festival should be completely finished. With a sense of excitement, Efna prepared to begin the grand festival, and every staff member at the kindergarten put an incredible amount of effort into it. Standing on the main stage, the teacher reflected on how much each moment like this filled her life with happiness. She carefully held a huge purple magic ball in her hands and was ready to thank everyone present. The lights in the hall were to go out soon to create a mysterious atmosphere, and the teacher asked parents to be careful and move in an orderly manner. The children were getting ready for the start of the festival, and everyone was incredibly curious about what would happen next. Some children's parents even invited artists to come along to capture this wonderful moment. The ladies were discussing the first young gentleman's performance, and one of them said that he even practiced dancing at home. Parents said that the children's endurance improved greatly after the classes, and everyone noticed the changes. The biggest event of the kindergarten semester, and the time when staff suffer the most, was just beginning now. From the teacher's side, this celebration was built on the tears of all those involved, and now a city teacher has spoken out about the opening of the kindergarten festival. At this solemn moment, all the parents held their breath, anticipating an exciting event, but suddenly the doors of the hall opened. Suddenly, knights in armor entered the kindergarten auditorium, but they definitely shouldn't have appeared here now. Holding the magic ball in her hands, the teacher began to worry, not understanding how the knights and the great temple appeared here. Efna apologized, warning that this was a kindergarten, but for some reason the armed soldiers dared to enter inside. It was obvious that the knights had no intention of listening to the teacher, and one of them pointed a sharp spear upward. The knight commanders stated that they had received a serious report that teacher Efna was a real black magician and was obliged to go with them right now. This situation might have seemed funny if it hadn't been serious, but now the teacher was being accused of witchcraft while holding a large purple ball in her hands. The knight Efna insisted that she had no idea about black magic, and she couldn't understand what kind of report they were talking about. Suddenly, the knight declared that her name had been personally called by the saint, and they had arrived solely by her order. And only now the heroine finally realized that her sister was the only one to blame for everything that happened. That same cutie Lillian, who actually turned out to be the main villain of the novel, It was she who asked the knights to bring the teacher, who was obliged to submit to detention and cooperate with the Knights of the Saint. The purple ball fell from the teacher's hands, her fragile wrists now shackled with iron handcuffs. But the teacher continued to fight, and in fact she was not involved in black magic. The knights suggested that the girl tell this to the saint personally, but by her order they had to bring her right away. The parents were puzzled by what was happening on stage, but it certainly didn't look like a stupid joke, because Efna was crying bitterly. If children see that the knights drag the teacher right off the stage, they will definitely be scared. The teacher had no say in the matter, and the knights had no way of knowing what trick she might pull to escape. Unfortunately, the children saw the knights taking their teacher away somewhere, and this was definitely not in the script. Little Malin raised a real panic. She asked Makshin to quickly free the teacher, but it was the knights from the temple. The girl's father was now very far away, and was busy treating people, and the young gentleman's father was too busy. Therefore, the children did not even suspect who, even among the adults, they could ask to save the innocent teacher. Band-Aid looked sadly at his older brother, who had the high title of Duke and could certainly help the girl, but his brother only silently watched everything that was happening. The knights brought the teacher to a dark, damp dungeon, and the girl certainly didn't expect to find herself in such a place. She understood that her stupid little sister was to blame for everything, as she was trying to prove something again. Only a single light illuminated this miserable, gloomy place, from which the teacher had no idea how she could get out. Suddenly, the silhouette of her sister appeared behind the iron bars, dissatisfied that the knights were not keeping the place in perfect order. Lillian even pretended that she hadn't expected to see her older sister here at all. The teacher looked silently at the villain, who asked if the road here must have been very difficult. Efna immediately decided to get to the point and asked why her younger sister said that she possessed black magic, and even if it were true, she certainly had no right to treat an aristocrat like that. Apparently, Lillian became completely fearless once she received the honorary title of saint and secured the support of the temple. The lady put on a sweet expression and admitted that she only came here because she was worried about her older sister. There was nothing real in her eyes, full of lies and deceit, and Efna knew it very well. My sister told me that she had recently discovered a special talent, and my father was delighted, but unfortunately, my sister still hadn't discovered any talents. And now there was something much more important. The heroine asked her sister to think about it, and perhaps she was wrong in her accusations. The older sister insisted that little Lillian had always been prone to making disastrous mistakes, and now was quite the case. The teacher knew Lillian was pretending to be the real daughter of the family, and how she enjoyed watching her suffer. The lady wondered if Lillian had already been included in his family register, as she had so desperately wanted to do all her life. The saint became angry in an instant. Her anger crossed all boundaries, and she was ready to hit her older sister. Efna only looked proudly into the eyes of the impudent deceiver, who had only pretended to be a good person her whole life. Lillian understood that such behavior could negatively impact her role in the temple, and now the opinions of others were much more important to her. The villainess simply thanked her older sister for being arrogant all her life, as always, without the slightest feeling of guilt. The teacher was confident of her impunity, and there was no need to explain anything about black magic, about which she knew nothing. Efna didn't understand why she suddenly had to prove something to anyone, but suddenly her sister asked if she remembered this piece of paper. For some reason, the little sister ended up with the same piece of paper that Efna had found when she discovered the strange, dark dungeon. Lillian left a note there on purpose, and if a black magician touched the piece of paper, she would immediately know about it. The teacher insisted that the note was already like that before she touched it. The paper reacted the moment the teacher touched it, and it sounded like unreal nonsense. Also found in Efna's belongings was a book written in a strange, illegible font, and on the last page was a symbol of ancient black magic. In fact, it was a randomly found story, and the teacher did not understand what problem there could be with these things. The next second, she remembered that the author had indeed drawn a symbol of black magic on the pages of the book. The author jokingly tried to draw a symbol for his readers, but now his stupid joke has turned out to be terrible for the heroine. Lillian laughed, guessing even her self-assured sister was speechless when she saw all the evidence before her. The saint ordered the knights to interrogate this witch until she confessed, but Efna was simply shocked by the absurdity and furious at the author. Sister wanted to make sure that they found something else on Efna, so she asked the knights to interrogate her thoroughly and not miss anything. Even despite some family ties, for Efna, this girl instantly became the most terrible enemy. The saint really did trick the knights, and they only obediently followed her orders. The knight was holding some kind of vine with thorns in his hands, which definitely looked like an object of torture. The teacher's hands were shackled with iron cuffs, but she wasn't ready to clean up right now, and perhaps she just needed to confess. Only the main character is able to endure torture in silence. And sitting in a dark, gloomy cell, the teacher recalled how her colleagues gave her a gift for raising her entry level to the academy. Efna recalled how one fine day the kindergarten received the highest marks, and she was incredibly happy about it. Closing her eyes, she imagined the little ones who were probably still waiting for her to appear and were very worried about their beloved teacher. And she couldn't even imagine that at the very beginning of a grand children's festival, she could find herself in such a terrible place. The knight approached the girl and asked her to tell the whole truth, wanting to get a sincere confession from her. Feeling inner strength, the heroine smiled slyly and declared that knights can do whatever they want. It had been a long time since she had appeared in this place, and Lillian had finally come to her sister to receive recognition. Despite being extremely tired, exhausted, and afraid, the teacher still had no intention of giving in to her stupid sister. The saint smiled naively, looking into her sister's eyes, and was sure that she would soon definitely split. Apparently, the knights had not worked hard enough, so the saint gave another order for them to continue their work. Duke Hildebrand burst into the dungeon with a pistol she, chained and leaning against the cold stone wall, expected anything but him. The cold stone walls echoed his rage, every step a resounding warning. The torchlight danced across his determined face, casting deep shadows that emphasized his unyielding will. The saint immediately ran up to the Duke. The pistol shots frightened her incredibly, and she decided to ask what it all meant. The lady began to mumble something about how she was incredibly scared, that she couldn't even stop shaking from what she had seen. Now the saint looked like an innocent girl, and every time she successfully used this maneuver, time was precious, and every moment of delay could cost her her life. The Duke's appearance was sudden. He broke down the door with one foot and still hasn't explained anything. The saint assured that even if it was the Grand Duke standing before her, such behavior was too absurd even for a respectable gentleman. The Duke only quietly asked that he be addressed as His Grace, the Grand Duke of Hildebrand, and that informal communication be avoided. The saint certainly didn't expect the venerable gentleman to speak rudely to her, but he came here to fulfill his duty. Likewise, he had an important mission, as important as the saint's, and it was not by chance that they both ended up here. The Duke turned to Lillian and asked if it was true that traces of black magic had been discovered during Efna's arrest. The restraining device used on the teacher is definitely a prohibited device related to magicians. Only today the knight bought this acquisition only because he was told that it was genuine. Everything turned out to be wrong, and for this reason, Lillian and the knights will need to undergo an investigation with the Duke. The saint stated that the Duke was in the Great Temple, and the goddess would be angry if he took her away from there. I assure you that the Lord was making a huge mistake. The Duke was clearly of a completely different opinion, and holding the pistol tightly in his hand, he continued to insist on his own. In the cell, half-lit and smelling of dampness, he saw her, the teacher. She was standing, chained to the wall, with a mixture of fear and despair in her eyes. Hildebrand rushed towards the teacher, freeing her from her chains in 2 counts. The teacher, still shocked by what had happened, could hardly say anything. The teacher didn't even imagine that her savior from her evil sister would be the venerable Duke, who was supposed to be directly observing the young gentleman's performance. For some reason, he ended up here, despite the opening of a children's festival. The iron shackles finally lay on the floor, and the teacher's fragile hands were no longer in danger. The Duke carefully took her in his arms, but the teacher was so worried that she felt like she was ready to die right then and there. The Duke laughed and asked if he should really kill all those knights, but the teacher only asked him to refrain from such dark jokes. This meant that Lillian had finally gotten herself into a huge mess, despite her lofty title of saint. The captain warned the saint that the high priest was extremely displeased with her because of her actions, which were based solely on suspicion. This time, Lillian will definitely not get away with it, because the captain asked the Leary to take care of her health before the interrogation begins. And if the saint refuses, citing an unexpected illness, it will be very unpleasant. Having warned the saint, the captain hastened to leave, and the girl realized that this time she could have made a terrible mistake. Johann hurried to the teacher to check if everything was okay, but he certainly didn't expect to see her here in such a place. Efna must have looked terrible now. She admitted that she really wasn't a black magician, and she was just an ordinary teacher of the Empire. The captain warned the knight that they would later have a serious conversation where they would be obliged to tell the whole truth. To begin with, Johann warned the Duke that it was necessary to take care of the teacher's health because the lady was clearly under a lot of stress. Despite the terrible situation, Efna continued to insist that she was completely fine, and the Duke was not at all stupid enough to leave the one who was being tortured in this terrible, gloomy dungeon. Johann understood that the lady was clearly terrified and urgently needed healing magic. But the captain did not want to entrust the girl's treatment to a doctor with unknown skills and experience, and the teacher could have been cured long ago if the Duke had not wasted time on empty chatter, so the captain decided that enough of pointless arguments was enough. He carefully sat the teacher on his lap and placed his palms on hers, from which healing magic emanated. The Duke felt a sickening feeling when he saw that someone had touched the teacher, and he looked at the knight with indignation. The knight understood that he could face a terrible punishment, and throwing the liana out of his hands, he said that it simply lay on the ground. But the knight was unable to get rid of the unregistered weapon, which had already been picked up by a knight of the Imperial detachment. The young man laughed, because he was already dying from her anticipation, and then suddenly he had weighty proof in his hands. The dark, gloomy dungeon was illuminated by a powerful light, much more powerful than that of divine power. The teacher managed to turn around and saw a crowd of beautiful young men standing in front of her, who were as perfect as if hand-picked. For a second, the lady even thought that she had finally died and gone to a wonderful paradise. Otherwise, what were such a group of beautiful young people doing here? The Duke asked one of the knights to be quiet until he understood how it had happened, and they had the misfortune of being caught by the commander. They were the Empire's magic control knights under the command of Duke Hildebrand. Jaden admitted that one person's face seemed familiar to him, and he tried to remember where he had seen him. Perhaps they had met at an inn or a tavern, and the young man was desperately trying to remember. Jaden clearly felt that he had definitely seen this man somewhere, and he tried to go over all the familiar places in his thoughts. Finally, something began to clear up in the gentleman's mind. He turned to the commander, asking if he really didn't remember anything. This was the same guy the Duke was definitely already familiar with, and at that moment the Duke finally actually remembered. The young man shed bitter tears, anticipating imminent punishment for his crimes, which the Duke surely already knew about. The teacher overheard their conversation. They were talking about some unknown deserters who had infiltrated the Empire. It was the same man who got drunk and then beat up his comrade and ran away, and I think his name was Jones Helix. The knights were often pressured by their superiors to finally catch the criminal, and Jaden spent 4 days searching for him without sleeping a wink. All this time, the impudent deceiver was next to him, and it was because of him that the knights even crossed the mountains, and all this time he hid in the great temple. The Duke smiled mysteriously and said that despite her short service, the saint had already managed to pick up all sorts of vileness. The girl stood silently to the side the whole time, fully aware that she could receive a serious punishment. And in order to somehow protect herself, the saint admitted that Sir Helix's affairs had nothing to do with her, despite all his pleas for help. The captain suggested that the teacher not waste her energy, but simply give him the opportunity to heal her. Efna felt incredibly weak. First aid was finally given, and Johann asked the girl to rest a little so that he could finish later. Slowly closing her eyes, the teacher whispered thanks to the gentleman for instantly healing her wounds. The Duke was by her side the whole time, watching carefully to make sure the captain didn't do anything wrong. There was definitely a tense atmosphere between the two heroes, and the commander would soon have to leave. Efna was finally completely safe, but she would probably remember this festival for the rest of her life. The girl's wounds turned out to be very deep, so the captain had to come to one place to successfully complete the treatment. As soon as Efna woke up, she immediately began to worry about the festival at the kindergarten, from which the knight took her away. The captain assured her that everything was in perfect order and that the girl no longer had to worry about anything. He was ready to do everything possible to ensure that the teacher would not be hurt by the use of magical power, and Johann warned that she might feel a sharp pain and might even hit him. The teacher was willing to help in any way and was ready to trust Johann, who had already saved her more than once. Efna's wounds from the dungeon were deep and painful, but Johann knew that his magic, despite its power, could heal her. When the magical force touched her skin, Efna flinched. Instead of the expected relief, she felt a sharp, piercing pain, as if hot needles were piercing her flesh. The pain was so intense that she covered her mouth with her hand, barely suppressing a scream. It turned out that magic can be unpleasant, but it is necessary to heal wounds. Johann held the girl's hand tightly and continued to say that everything would soon be okay, and the pain should go away. Despite the pain, Efna knew that Johann was doing everything he could. She had to endure it if she wanted to survive. She grabbed his hand, trying not to scream. Soon it will all be over. The magical power will begin to act, and the teacher will no longer feel this sharp, piercing pain. The teacher was crying. She really wanted to see the festival in the kindergarten, but she would be able to do this as soon as she felt better. The captain increased the concentration of the magical power that was causing Efna pain, and was ready to prevent her from suffering when he had the means of healing in his hands. The lady's wounds began to heal before our eyes, like a fast-forward film demonstrating the miracle of regeneration. The bloody streaks on her arms and legs were fading, giving way to thin, pink skin, new and vulnerable. She felt how the magical energy that pierced her body with sharp pain gradually gave way to warmth and relief. Efna felt her strength returning, the weakness that had been holding her back receding, and she looked at Johann with gratitude and admiration. Efna admitted that she really doesn't know anything about black magic. She found this book by chance and took it only because she was simply interested. Johann said that the investigation had already been completed and the teacher was completely innocent. He had risked everything to save her, and now, healed and ready to fight, she was ready to repay him in kind. The captain promised that no one would ever dare to hit the girl with a whip again, and that this would never happen again. As expected, Efna turned out to be a very brave girl for a teacher, but she did not want her Khan to see such terrible things. When she came to a little, she looked around, not understanding where she was, and as it turned out, Johann brought her to the bedroom in the great temple, and right now she was lying on the venerable gentleman's bed, completely unaware of how it had ended up there. The teacher slid off the bed in surprise as soon as she realized that she was lying on the captain's own bed, but he couldn't allow her to do that. Efna's body still ached a little, and the healer certainly couldn't let his patient go when he wasn't ready yet. The sleeves of Johann's shirt were rolled up to the elbows, and suddenly the heroine saw deep cuts on his arm. The teacher immediately noticed this, but the captain pretended that everything was perfectly fine with him. Sometimes stray cats wander into the temple, Johann admitted. He quickly examined the injured man, and it seemed the cat had simply scratched him. He wanted the teacher not to worry about his condition, but the teacher was even more worried about little Maylin. Johann asked the teacher to rest a little, because after everything that happened, her body was still weakened. The captain left the bedroom and wished the lady a good rest, promising to return soon. The assistant came to inform the captain. He checked the evidence fabricated by St. Lillian. Now we need to decide what to do with Jones Helix, the same knight who tortured the teacher. Unexpectedly, the captain simply asked to be left alone, but the assistant was sure that he needed to be questioned as soon as possible. And to be fair, this man was definitely guilty, but for some reason the captain refused to interrogate him. Johann said he was only doing it for one reason. The teacher said she didn't like seeing violent things. Little Maylin, with her arms spread out to the sides, slept soundly on the huge bed. Next to her lay teacher Efna, enjoying the soft bed, and so they spent about 7 days. The teacher was on special paid sick leave at the Great Temple all this time, where her condition was monitored every day. Every day the little girl came to see the teacher, and even despite the adult's words, the girl still came to her every day. The little girl always received sincere care from Captain Johann, and early in the morning he came to pick up the little girl, asking the teacher for forgiveness. Efna asked the master if he remembered what she had told him this morning, but the captain only recalled something about meat stew. The teacher said important words. She didn't want the captain to constantly apologize, and it's not his fault at all. So Efna asked him, since he remembered it so well, why he kept apologizing again, since she could flare up without even realizing it. The captain smiled and kindly asked the teacher to be angry with him, since he didn't see anything scary in it. Here the teacher was powerless, and the adult commander certainly had no intention of listening to her like a little child. The captain decided that the lady would be interested to know the response of the imperial family. He brought documents confirming mutual consent, with the emperor's seal. Efna thanked Johann for showing her a document that was quite important to her, and which she had asked about earlier. The young man was most worried that the teacher might feel ill from reading this boring information. The maid informed the captain that they had finished preparing for the teacher's departure, but that did not mean that she needed to hurry. The captain even got the girl some new clothes so she could change right away and leave with new emotions. The teacher was incredibly grateful to the captain for his concern, although she did not quite understand why he treated her this way. Now she didn't want to think about it at all. There were wonderful people next to her who helped her in difficult times. This is exactly the kind of person Captain Johan became, who seemed to be there every time at the most opportune time. The captain only quietly congratulated the girl on her recovery, imagining the difficult path she had to go through over the past few days. At the kindergarten, everyone was very worried about the teacher's absence, and one day the director decided to go to the temple. In fact, Efna had even gained weight, but her colleague insisted that the teacher had lost weight and that she definitely needed to eat something. She even offered to take a few days off, but Efna decided that she had had enough rest and could not take any more from there. She couldn't really say it. The bed was so comfortable, with the microfiber blanket, and she definitely wouldn't leave it for weeks. Considering that it takes 2 weeks for an injury to fully heal, this is quite logical, but Efna did not want to forget about her duty as a teacher. One day, her second eldest brother came to visit his sister, and she, ignoring him, asked him to knock before entering. The brother reported that the girl had a visitor, and she introduced herself as the director of the kindergarten. This meant that the director of the kindergarten actually came to the temple to check on her condition. The lady prepared comfortable home clothes and tea, which helped to recover, and asked Efna not to worry about kindergarten, but just to have a good rest for a few more days. The director asked to simply accept the gift and not refuse the offer, and the gift itself was prepared by the kindergarten staff and members of the parent committee. Everyone was incredibly worried about her condition, understanding that she had to go through a lot, and it was very difficult for her all this time. Suddenly, the director asked if she had heard that what had happened had turned out to be a huge mistake on the part of the temple. An official letter was received from the Great Temple, detailing what had happened and proving the teacher's innocence. The principal was angry at how they even managed to conduct their business if they dared to threaten an innocent teacher. And as expected, Efna turned out to be very kind, and the main rule for her in communication was to show gentleness and kindness. Following a staff meeting, the kindergarten decided to temporarily cease participation in the church's educational volunteer program. The principal told the teacher about this, and Efna didn't understand why they made such a drastic decision. The director warned that this measure was temporary, and she looked even more terrible when she spoke with such a strange smile. Teachers were still able to continue supplying teaching materials, but many volunteers could not even read. The decision had already been made after the meeting, but suddenly 2 more visitors came to Efna. They were the children's parents, 2 noble aristocrats who came as soon as they heard that Efna had returned to the kindergarten. The girls brought her a small gift, and they say that on the Eastern continent it is customary to eat it after leaving the hospital. She didn't even notice how wonderful communication had developed between her visitors, and the friendly lady chatted over a cup of tea. Her parents were unhappy. Just think, the teachers had set her up. How good it was that the most terrible of all parents were on her side. After the first unsuccessful festival, the honorable gentlemen and parents were once again gathered in the ceremonial hall to finally appreciate the children's performances. Efna noticed the murderous expressions on the faces of these people, and probably the last festival in the garden had incredibly upset the 3 of them. Finally, Efna, a young teacher with a kind smile, stepped forward and, like an experienced conductor, waved her hand, setting the rhythm for the welcoming dance. The drumsticks began to beat in unison, creating a cheerful melody, to which the children began their energetic dance. Before the main performance, the children prepared a cheerleading dance, and every gesture, every turn of the head was filled with enthusiasm and love for dance. The parents watched in admiration as their children's incredibly cute performances were performed, admiring each one. Efna watched her students with pride. She invested in them not only knowledge and skills, but also a piece of her soul. She delivered welcoming words. May this year's kindergarten festival become the most luxurious and grandiose event. The welcoming dance was a true triumph of the festival. The vibrant costumes, lively music, and genuine childish joy captivated the hearts of everyone present. Every movement, every gesture of the little artists caused a storm of feelings in the hearts of the parents. In every look, in every gesture, one could feel the unbreakable connection between parents and children. The children, inspired by the support of their parents, danced and played with even greater enthusiasm, striving to please their dearest spectators. The teacher was so glad that while she was sick, the children did not forget the most important dance. The little ones were dancing very synchronously, but suddenly little Mei-ling asked the young gentleman to watch his hand, which he was holding incorrectly. At the same time, Maxon tried to support a young boy who was crying on stage but continued to dance. Perhaps the teacher hoped that the children had changed and stopped arguing, but fortunately, the relationship between them was still the same. The emperor watched the children's dance closely, and the future crown prince also found himself in the center of attention during the dance. Johann laughed, saying that the boy had everything and more to become a great emperor. There was, as always, a special atmosphere between these people, but suddenly young Mr. Bantade stood out from the general group. Efna, the teacher with a sensitive heart, instinctively rushed forward, but froze, giving little Bantade a chance to cope on his own. Little Bantade fell mid-dance. His world seemed to freeze. The music, cheerful and upbeat a second ago, hung in the air as if orphaned. The little boy, confused by the unexpected fall, sat on the ground, surrounded by noisy drums and dancing comrades. But Bantade was not one to give up easily, so he gathered his courage, wiped away his tears with his fist and, using his small palms, tried to rise. He remembered the teacher's words. She asked him to never forget that you should never give up, even if you fell right in front of everyone. It was a life lesson delivered in the most unexpected way, and Bantade, the little hero of the day, delivered it brilliantly. The parents understood that this moment was priceless. They knew that time was flying inexorably, and their children would grow up quickly. The teacher asked the dear parents to return to their seats to continue watching the magnificent performance. The choir was scheduled to perform next, and Efna asked everyone to listen carefully to the song the children had been diligently rehearsing. The Duke had been watching the festival closely the whole time, and even seemed to be impressed by the performance. The teacher began to play a beautiful melody on the piano, and the children prepared to perform a wonderful song. Efna hoped that all the performances would be enjoyed by the parents, and that each of them would truly remember this day for a long time. The main character came out in a long cloak with a large toy sword, and in this story, he was the most important warrior. The plot of the children's play was as follows. The main character Philip challenged the strongest of all, Maxon, but he was the weakest of all and suffered a crushing defeat. According to the story, he ate the fruit of the sacred tree, played by the young Mr. Bantade, in order to become stronger and deal with his opponents. Little Mei-ling supervised the children's performance and watched everyone very closely. Her performance only becomes smooth when she begins to scold others after undergoing special training from the spirit, Mei-ling. When the young master ate the fruit of the sacred tree, he truly felt incredible strength within himself. All this time, the boy had an incredibly strong rival, and he became brave and courageous only thanks to his friends. Another hero insisted that the mysterious tree gave him its fruit, and only thanks to this did he feel new strength. Before the boy could finish his speech, someone pulled Philip so hard that he couldn't even stand on his feet. It was Mei-ling again, who was angry because he didn't say anything about the spirit, as it was written in the story. The teacher had to go out to deal with a scene on stage where an elegant spirit had just grabbed another character by the collar. The little girl was loudly indignant, while the teacher quietly tried to calm her down as quickly as possible. With the realization that the heroine had truly returned, the kindergarten festival finally came to an end, and the next day the kindergarten colleagues finally breathed a sigh of relief. Now the teacher had to prepare for an event dedicated to Children's Day, which is celebrated like in any other country. The exhausted teachers were absolutely unable to retreat, and Efna suggested that they stop prevaricating and start a planning meeting. One of the girls suggested giving a tour of the puppet theater, like last year, but the troupe has become very famous and rarely comes here. So Efna was looking for other places they could rent, and at that moment the director showed up at the meeting. The teachers greeted a lady whom no one expected to see here at a teachers' meeting. The principal smiled and admitted that she had come here to introduce the new assistant as a teacher. This day began too unexpectedly. A new teacher named Felix appeared on the teaching staff, but it is incredibly difficult to meet a male teacher. The director assured that this man was strong, so there was no need to hesitate to load him with work. This new man attracted the attention of all the female teachers, and it was definitely impossible to take your eyes off him. To Efna's great surprise, he was holding a huge axe in his hands, and he certainly didn't look like a kindergarten teacher. He may have just arrived from training, but his pretentious appearance was incredibly displeasing to Mrs. Efni. The young man was so brazen that he dared to show up with his shirt unbuttoned, as if he were on a training ground. It turned out that Felix didn't care at all what people thought of him, and he was ready to appear as a teacher even in this form. The young man asked what was the matter and why the girls were looking so intently at his appearance. Felix looked like a woodcutter's servant, but he was not at all suited to the role of a teacher, but his body was too perfect to be the result of hard work alone. Efna was still able to say something, but his other colleagues were completely stunned. The stunned teacher had absolutely no idea how to greet the strange instructor. The principal reprimanded the new teacher for bringing an axe, but it turned out he had stopped chopping wood because the lady had asked him to hurry up. Felix turned out to be the director's slightly immature nephew, and the teacher thought that was just a little surprising. This young man was strong, and it would most likely be easier with the children because of the class sunlight. Efna didn't expect a new member to join their ranks, but she was always happy to have a new teacher. The director decided to introduce everyone first, but as soon as she turned around, she saw that her nephew had long been gone. Felix had almost left the room, and the teacher also decided that she needed to leave. The lady asked Felix to stop, but he was walking so fast that the teacher couldn't catch up with him at all. She loudly asked the young man to stop, offering to talk a little about the upcoming training sessions. As soon as she approached him, Felix started shouting loudly and declared that the teacher was incredibly annoying to him. This unexpectedness made her step back, and she didn't notice how she accidentally stepped on a wooden floorboard sticking out of the floor. She felt weightlessness with one foot, while she tried to stay on the other, but it was unlikely that she would succeed. She staggered back like a blade of grass carried by the wind, but a strong man's hand still managed to grab her by the waist. Felix acted too childishly and asked you if the girl was really made of paper since she could fall so easily. The young man probably underestimated his incredible strength, and if he pushed the fragile girl, she would most likely fall. Felix had no intention of catching her because he was afraid that the teacher might fall, and suddenly asked her to stop following him. Efna also didn't like pursuing this man, whom she didn't really like from the first seconds. She had no other option. This was a new teacher, and she was politely going to introduce herself to him. The teacher extended her hand and began to formally introduce herself, while Felix wondered why she was doing this. These were basic rules of etiquette for teachers, and the teacher asked him to repeat the words after her, looking forward to working together. The young gentleman was not very accommodating, and it seemed he was ready to ignore elementary rules of etiquette. The honors teacher flashed her authority she was now his boss, and warned him that they needed to get to know each other in order to get along. Now they were connected by their work in the kindergarten, and Efna understood, despite the teacher's young age, that she needed to teach him the rules of conduct. She was good at dealing with restless people like the new teacher. So, despite his anger, Felix gave his name and admitted through gritted teeth that he was very pleased to meet you. It was as if the young man was doing this for the first time and was completely unfamiliar with the rules of politeness. Efna was willing to endure anything as long as the teachers did their jobs well. No one knew what kind of environment Felix grew up in or how privileged he was, but his upbringing did not seem at all prudent. Every day the teacher tried to control him, and the young man even offered to work overtime today, but for some reason now he was reneging on his words. Felix was very difficult to deal with, especially when he would suddenly turn his back and disappear as soon as the teacher appeared in his field of vision. Today, suddenly the emperor appeared in the office, greeting the teacher, and appearing here too unexpectedly. The emperor admitted that his son's teacher had been through so much and suffered so much, and he hastened to check how she was feeling. And as expected from Efna's teacher, she felt just fine and was once again enthusiastically engaged in her work. After all, the emperor always came for this reason, and the girl thoughtfully offered to bring him a cup of tea. Suddenly she heard the sound of footsteps, although the other teachers should have already gone home. She could recognize these steps among 1,000. They were fast and chaotic, and indeed, a man's voice was heard in the teacher's office. Mr. Felix appeared in the doorway of the office. The girl did not want to see him now, but he had come a long way to buy educational materials. Felix wanted to tell Efna about this, but looking around, he assumed that she had probably gone somewhere. Efna was surprised, because teacher Felix definitely had to go home, and he certainly never stayed so long. Perhaps the teacher decided to take his job seriously and take the kindergarten seriously. It was a good question, but now the teacher had to explain why she was standing with the emperor and hiding from the other teacher. She prayed that Felix would just go home like he usually did and disappear from the office as quickly as possible. The young man would have preferred not to make a mountain out of a molehill, but he was still incredibly irritated that the teacher treated him like a little child. He finally left the room while the teacher was wondering what was wrong with her behavior. The footsteps were no longer heard, and the heroine suggested that the emperor come out of the secluded place in which they had been hiding all this time. It must have been very stuffy here, and the lady apologized for making the gentleman hide suddenly. He instantly understood everything, and even played along with the girl, realizing that this could be very important for her. Suddenly, the emperor came so close to Ethna that she could feel his heavy breathing, and he asked if his appearance really bothered the noble teacher, since she felt so agitated. Trying to stop her knees from shaking, the lady smiled and asked how the great emperor could embarrass her. After all, this gentleman is a great treasure of the nation, and she certainly cannot feel this way, because it would be simple disrespect. A soft blow was heard above her head, and the unexpected emperor said something about death but her execution. The teacher didn't understand whether this man was joking with her now, but she knew that raising a hand to the emperor's body was a grave sin. And this awkward movement could lead to serious punishment, but really, she just touched him. The unexpected emperor burst out laughing, and the teacher couldn't understand why he was behaving like that. She was sure that he should always be serious, but the young man was laughing, and he had just decided to just joke with the teacher. The emperor certainly couldn't make such jokes, and that night she felt a little stupid, because she was sure he was serious. Judging by the girl's face, she will now need a different medicine, and not poison for a cruel execution. The emperor warned that he would definitely ask his assistant to send medicine for the teacher tomorrow. Ethna didn't understand whether something had happened, why the emperor was behaving so strangely. He warned that he was going to come another time, but the teacher was sure that their conversation was not over yet. No matter how hard she tried to get the gentleman to talk, he only dryly said that he had urgent business. The lady saw the emperor off from the kindergarten and only wanted him to be careful during the reception. After the meeting, the heroine felt rather unusual, and she was a little confused by the expression on the emperor's face. One moment he was too cheerful, the next second anger appeared on his face, and the heroine clearly felt murderous intent. Today, the teacher went to the principal's office. Student Aristia from the Duke's house suddenly stopped going to class, but no one responded to the notifications from the kindergarten. The baby was the Duke's young daughter, and in the original story, she was the main villain. She, the teacher, thought that now, when the little girl still goes to kindergarten, like an ordinary child, everything should be fine. It was now the beginning of the semester at the kindergarten, and every day of absence was of great importance for the child's education. An event dedicated to Children's Day was about to take place, and the teacher, in the director's opinion, had only one option left: a home visit. After this decision, Ethna went to the Duke's house. The director said that she was uncomfortable forcing her to work overtime alone, so she assigned an assistant for the heroine. Ethna would have preferred to go alone, because she had been given a gentleman to help her, with whom she certainly had nothing in common. It was teacher Felix, who would have just wanted to relax on his day off, but he was forced to work again. The teacher suggested walking half the way. She couldn't take a long ride in the carriage, and she really hoped that Felix would be pleased with the walk. He was indignant that if you drag yourself along like that, all your muscles will atrophy, and you need to walk quickly and run a lot. The whole way, Felix kept saying something about balance between the upper and lower body, and the teacher thought her ears would start bleeding at some point. At last, they reached the carriage stop in perfect order, and the coachman announced loudly that the next carriage was ready to depart. Ethna said they needed to get to the Duke's house of Hesbon, and she was happy to pay for the trip. Her trip definitely won't happen right now, because little Maylene has already spotted her favorite teacher. A loud child's voice echoed throughout the street, and she ran up to Ethna to hug her joyfully. She certainly didn't expect to see the teacher on her morning walk, and the lady didn't expect to see her pupil either. As it turned out, the little girl was playing here with her uncle, the priest, who was already clearly tired from the long, grueling walk. The little girl suggested to the teacher that they go to her friend's place to play, and Ethna looked at Felix, wanting to hear his answer. She was happy to invite her favorite teacher to her home and admitted that she would now like to take a walk with her. The priest had no choice but to let the little girl go, and he asked the teacher to be sure to take care of her. The heroes finally arrived at the Duke's house, and little Maylin went on an exciting walk with her teachers. As soon as they appeared at the door, they were immediately greeted by a young lady in a beautiful pink dress who came out personally to greet the guests. A little girl in a cute pink hat named Aristia personally greeted the valuable guests each time because it is the duty of an aristocrat to respect her teacher. The teacher greeted the little girl politely because Aristia was very smart and educated. However, that she subtly hinted that she hardly wants to see little Maylin in her house, whose members are allergic to ugliness. The girl will definitely become a villain in the future, and just think, two sworn enemies met so unexpectedly. The butler was going to take care of the guests, but the young lady warned that these were guests of honor, and that only 2 adults were involved. The teacher asked Maylin to come forward. Aristia was not allowed to speak rudely to her friends, and the girls needed to say hello politely. Since it was the teacher's request, the young lady agreed to do it, but still called the little girl ugly and ugly. The teacher thanked the butler for the invitation, who was about to lead them into the living room. They sat down on a luxurious sofa, and the aroma of green tea brought from another country filled the entire room. As befits an aristocrat, the mother asked the young lady to take care of the guests, and she already received them like an adult. The teacher had only one reason for visiting the little girl why the girl refuses to go and does not show up at kindergarten. Aristia didn't seem to hear her words. She turned her attention to the cake and still called the baby ugly. Lady Efna asked again what the girl had been doing lately and why she had decided not to attend kindergarten anymore. The young guest asked the girl if she really thought a kindergarten was just an ordinary playground. And this was not a place where you could come and go as you pleased, and now Maylin looked like an old, grumbling man. The young lady seemed to have already tried to find ways to shirk, and Maylin warned that if she continued in the same spirit, she would grow up to be an ugly person. She was trying to find out if the little lady really had a good reason for skipping important classes. The little girl was very worried and said that she couldn't go out and leave her sick sister, and hardly anyone could have guessed about this. The teacher began to worry when she heard that Aristia's little sister was very ill. The little girl admitted that her sister is driven by lovesickness and has been suffering for a long time. The girl insisted that this was indeed a serious problem, but the teacher only politely asked the girl to be sure to come to kindergarten starting tomorrow. Her sister had a very soft and kind heart, and for such a fragile girl it was too cruel to experience lovesickness. Aristia insisted that she must look after her older sister and promised to return to kindergarten only when she felt better. Efna didn't want to listen to stupid excuses at all and decided to have a serious talk with the young lady so that she would finally understand the seriousness of the situation. Felix chuckled and guessed that the teacher had some problems and what she was going to do about them next. She suggested that the girl tell a little more about her sister's lovesickness in order to try to understand the situation. The young lady said that the name her sister says changes every day and there are probably several people involved. Perhaps she was in love with more than one person, and according to the teacher, her sister was pleased with the unusual lady. She didn't expect to hear her ex-lover's name coming from another room in this house today. Judging by the female voice, it was definitely the baby's sister who was crying. How could Mr. Herdnix do this to her? Her cry sounded incredibly pathetic and thin, but the words that had just been spoken were ones that should never have appeared in a romantic fantasy. Pointing to the door, the young lady explained that her sister was in great despair and was definitely not talking about one person. Screams were heard from the room. It was clear that someone had dumped the girl and had not even warned her about the breakup, having found a new lover. The doors suddenly opened, a girl appeared in the hall, and judging by the bruises under her eyes, one could tell that she had been crying for a long time. The teacher did not expect to see the girl in such despair, and her loud screams even scared her. The little girl asked her sister to calm down, assuring her that she simply had visitors and that it was the teacher from the kindergarten. She rushed to hug her sister and tried to calm her down so that she would no longer behave so frighteningly. This girl turned out to be the young lady's elder sister, named Letitia Hesben, the daughter of the ducal house. The teacher greeted the lady politely, admitting that she was the class teacher. The little girl started telling what an amazing person the teacher was. She could do anything, and she could probably even help Letitia. Unfortunately, the lady had no one to talk to about this. She confessed that her fiancé's ex-girlfriend had returned, and it was from that moment that the young man began to behave differently. Of course, she didn't doubt him one bit, considering him a naturally kind person who simply couldn't force himself to be cold. The lady was in a state of utter despair while her impudent husband was clinging to another girl, and he probably liked her. She was talking nonsense, continuing to cry loudly, and the teacher realized that she definitely needed help. Such cases do indeed occur everywhere, and there were plenty of them at this time as well. Felix didn't think it was necessary to mess around with such trash, and declared that if the girl wasn't going to kill her husband, then she could simply break up with him. As soon as Letitia heard the words about murder, she wondered why she couldn't kill him. Madness and unrequited love were blazing in her head, and the teacher was asking the sweet lady to calm down, and there had to be a better way out than committing a crime. She didn't expect to see the girl in such a terrible state, who had absolutely no idea what she was doing. The heroine only came to inquire about attendance, but heard so much new information that concerned the personal lives of strangers. She definitely couldn't ignore these tears, and she understood perfectly well that the girl was simply sad and sorrowful. There were many rumors circulating among the ladies of high society that the Marquis was now openly dating his ex-girlfriend. He seemed completely unashamed and even openly participated in an auction of old books. It so happened that a lady I knew had an extra invitation, and she happily offered to give it to the teacher. Up until this point, everything had been going smoothly for the heroine, but now she needed a partner to go and buy the necessary books. Right now, both brothers were away on a business trip, and the auction was just around the corner, and Efna didn't understand how she could split into two. And there were two tasks to complete, and in that case, she had only one option left. She glanced at her partner, Felix, who had a butterfly on his nose and was snoring loudly, and it would be better if the heroine could simply split into two than go to the event with this man. She even considered asking one of her parents she needed a person of about the same age, unmarried. Only a few people came to mind, but unfortunately even they were all already taken. Efna was also busy every day, but these respectable people pestered her with questions every day and came at any time. So the heroine went to search. She heard that one of the heroes should definitely be at the training ground. She decided to go looking for him that evening, and she didn't expect to see so many muscular men in this place. The lady did not understand how they could live such a diligent life, and perhaps the teacher would even make frequent home visits. She even almost forgot that she had come here not to look at bare shoulders, but for a completely different reason. And just then, Captain Johann saw the teacher, apologizing for having to see all the mess right after training. Efna herself came without warning, so no one prepared for her visit. From the worried face, Johann understood that the teacher had come here for a reason, and that the little girl had really caused trouble again. Fortunately, the girl had been behaving well in the last few days, and there had been no problems with her behavior, and that was not the reason at all. It was rare to see a teacher at a loss for words, and the captain asked the lady to calmly tell everything so that this would not happen. Efna recently received a good invitation to a famous auction, but it said that she must appear with a partner. And he immediately agreed, and it seemed like he wasn't even going to ask which specific auction Efna was going to go to. The captain turned out to be quite the auction buff and asked when the event would take place. As soon as he learned that the auction would take place in just 3 days, Johann admitted that he would be busy on that particular day, since his engagement was scheduled for that date. The teacher sighed in surprise, because she didn't even expect that the gentleman was going to get engaged. It was not entirely clear from his facial expression whether this was a happy event for him or not. Johann didn't go into details, and he only made it clear that he really wouldn't be able to help in any way that day. Efna felt like it might have seemed careless on her part, and she had just almost made a huge mistake. If the engagement date had already been set, the teacher promised to keep her mouth shut until the official announcement, wishing the captain a wonderful love and family life. The teacher decided that it was always possible to go to the auction with someone else, and suggested that Johann focus on his preparation. The teacher quickly retreated to a safe distance, so as not to be known as an annoying friend who communicated too closely with the captain. She quickly left, and the young man only silently watched the fleeing silhouette, unable to tell her the whole truth. At that moment, the gentleman felt a strange sensation, as if he was going crazy, and did not understand at all what to do next. One of the options failed miserably. The heroine had to move on to Plan B, and it's good that she had already sent a request for a visit in advance. So after meeting with the captain, Efna decided to go to the Grand Duke's estate, and that's where her next option was located. The Duke's estate was luxurious, the black roofs contrasting incredibly with the dark gray walls of the mansion. The teacher immediately got down to business and informed the Duke that, if he didn't mind, she would like to ask him to accompany her. It was the first time in her life that Efna had proposed such a thing to men, and she didn't even understand how to behave correctly in such situations. The Duke silently accepted her proposal, and for some reason did not respond at all, which caused the teacher to panic even more. She warned that if the gentleman was uncomfortable, he could refuse at any time without hesitation and not feel guilty. This situation had nothing to do with the young master's training, and the heroine had no idea what the Duke was thinking about right now. She was more inclined to think that nothing would probably work out. The young man had a rather busy schedule, and with his character it would be quite difficult to persuade him. Unexpectedly, the Duke agreed and asked if there was any reason why he should not do this, promising to come to the Belchester residence on the day of the auction. Hearing the unexpected consent, the teacher did not even immediately believe that this had actually happened in reality. She had no doubt whatsoever of the generosity of the noble gentleman, who immediately agreed to help her. The teacher thanked the young man for the pleasant meeting, intending to meet him on the day of the auction, but unexpectedly the Duke offered to accompany her home. The weather outside was incredibly beautiful, so the teacher decided to go there herself, thanking the gentleman for his precious time. If the lady insisted on going alone, the Duke had no intention of stopping her, expressing his respect. Efna slammed the door loudly almost in the face of the venerable gentleman, while he remained standing there in bewilderment and silence. The young man was just curious as to which of them felt more burdened in this situation. Time gradually passed, and finally the long-awaited day of the auction arrived. To get to the auction, a person's clothes must reflect their status, and along with this message, Duke Hildebrand sent several items of clothing for the teacher. The lace, like frozen drops of dew, shimmered in the dim light, creating an aura of magic and unearthly beauty around her. The dress looked incredibly luxurious, the fabric was exquisite, and the teacher definitely couldn't help but feel inferior. Even the principal noted her attractive appearance and asked where the teacher was heading in such a luxurious outfit. A tall gentleman in a black coat was waiting for the girl near the carriage, while she told him that she was going to settle some business. Her carefully styled black hair contrasted perfectly with her piercing scarlet eyes, in the depths of which a storm of passions and hidden intentions was splashing. His posture was impeccable, every movement precise and graceful, betraying the years he had spent at court. The Duke was incredibly pleased. The delicate pink dress suited the teacher perfectly, and she admitted that it was all thanks to his excellent taste. Even for her it was too generous. The lady could not accept such a gift and promised to take good care of the dress. The carriage moved slowly in the twilight, and the Duke was sure that refusing a kind gesture would be even more impolite, so Efna would have to accept the dress as a gift. The teacher smelled a slight burning smell, and the young man said that it was probably gunpowder, because it came straight from the Empire's magical control. This meant that even today the Duke was busy with official business, and the teacher was afraid that it was taking up his time. It wasn't particularly stressful for the gentleman, but Efna was sure he needed to rest, and suggested turning the carriage around right now and heading back. The Duke was perfectly fine, and even if he had gone home, there was nothing to expect there except target shooting. Efna warned the master not to say such words in front of the boy, so that he would take care of his emotional education. The carriage slowly approached the luxurious palace, and the Duke asked the teacher to put on a mask, as they had arrived for a private auction. The place where the heroes arrived looked more like a place for banquets or a gambling house, but not at all like a place for a book auction. The place was full of people, and Hildebrand asked the girl to hold his hand so that they would not get lost in the crowd. Efna never liked to take part in gossip and discuss other people, but suddenly she heard the aristocrat call the young gentleman by the name of Hendrix. This was the name of the young lady's fiancé, and the teacher noticed the sweet couple. Hendrix promised to buy the girl the most incredible thing at this auction, but people didn't usually call books beautiful. The Duke decided to ask if the teacher was really there solely for the auction, but the heroine admitted that in fact she might have to do some observing today. True, the Duke was one of those who acted directly, and he would never watch from the shadows, trying to hide. Judging the Duke, the teacher didn't understand what this masquerade was for, but that evening she decided to simply trust the venerable gentleman. Hildebrand deftly took her hand, and at that moment the teacher felt that she would hardly be able to resist that evening. The more the heroine looked at the luxurious hall, the less the room resembled an auction house, and the cheaper quality seemed to be felt. And a strange smell spread throughout the hall, which the teacher could hardly confuse with anything else. A strange smell of metal, perhaps iron, permeated the mansion, and it was impossible not to notice the metallic taste. Even the Duke agreed there was definitely a strong smell, and perhaps the building had simply been used for other purposes before. The heroes took their places, and the Duke inquired how the teacher usually stored her books, since paper manuscripts are very fragile, and the lighting and temperature levels must be carefully regulated. The Duke noted that in such places the air was usually filled with the smell of old books, but here there was nothing of the sort, and the room did indeed look strange. On the contrary, a pungent smell hung heavily in the air, the smell of old blood, which could not be removed simply by opening the window. At that moment, the teacher felt scared because she also smelled blood. The host came out to the dear guests and thanked them for waiting, noticing how incredibly the aristocrat's eyes were shining. The loud clanging of chains and handcuffs echoed throughout the hall, and the bare feet of the prisoner walked right across the hall. The first lot was a young gentleman who grew up in a pasture with cows for 3 years, and who one day lost his family. The guests began to noisily discuss something, and each of them wanted to be the first to get their hands on a unique lot, and it turned out that none of them were books. This young gentleman was energetic and flourishing, incredibly handsome, but he had a small flaw that was immediately noticeable. The teacher looked at the Duke in bewilderment, indignant at what these people were talking about, and it was surprising that the Duke had not been able to find them earlier. Come to think of it, the Grand Duke's illegal slave auction just happened to be here, under the false name of an antique book auction. Ethna immediately understood what was happening here and asked the gentleman if this was really the place they had spoken about earlier. Now it was clear to Hildebrand why, after such a long investigation, they had not come up with any leads, and he was not even sure that he would ever find this place. The atmosphere in the room was becoming too unpleasant. The teacher understood that all this could look too suspicious. She needed to play a new role as a socialite, and Ethna asked the Duke in a sweet voice not to make her jealous. To make their relationship look real, the teacher needed to act more brazen. And the Duke immediately played along with her, asking loudly, almost for the entire hall to hear, whether yesterday's piquancy had not been enough for the lady. Their goal was for other aristocrats to hear their conversation, and the teacher spoke in a loud voice on purpose. She watched closely as Hendrix continued to flirt with the fair-haired blonde. Ethna had just witnessed a cruel deception. She realized that these people were brazenly deceiving Lady Letitia, and this girl did not know much. And Letitia's treacherous husband is actually just a complete scoundrel who has been deceiving the girl who loves him all this time. Suddenly, the Duke noticed that the teacher began to tremble and become agitated, suggesting that she hold him closer to feel safe. For some reason, Ethna decided to agree, and leaning on the Duke's strong shoulder, she admitted that she had probably simply overeaten at dinner. The Duke, and is this surveillance really so important that a fragile lady is even willing to be in such a terrible place? Perhaps the teacher was sure that if they escaped, she would want to catch them and beat them until they died. Now Ethna looked like a scheming villain. The Duke also didn't like being followed, and she would have preferred to turn the situation into a total bloodbath. The Duke smiled sweetly, as if this was the option that most appealed to him. And instead of hiding in the back seats of the auction, he too was ready to show who they really were. It was good that the Duke's companion had such refined taste, so the next second the young man, holding his pistol up, asked the distinguished guests to pay attention to him. The auction host asked the guests to calm down, claiming that there was a minor problem with the equipment and that they could continue the auction soon. Ethna wanted to stay with the Duke, but the young man asked her to go to the carriage to be safe. The teacher certainly didn't expect such a turn of events, but on the other hand, she was afraid to remain alone in the carriage, because the Duke would now have to remain here alone. Ethna didn't understand that if she left, she could survive, but in that case, what would happen to the Grand Duke? While thoughts were whirling around in her head, she continued to stand next to him, and had no intention of leaving. Despite the fact that she was incredibly scared, Ethna continued to stay close, and did not even notice how the masquerade mask flew off her face. The blade touched the girl's fragile neck. One of the auction founders managed to grab her and offered the Duke to drop the pistol so that she wouldn't die. In just 1 second, the heroine found herself in the clutches of a terrible bandit, and right now she became the main character of this auction. A few drops of blood fell on the floor. Duke Hildeband turned around calmly and saw that Efna was incredibly scared. He immediately dropped his weapon while the bandit shouted that this is exactly what he should have done earlier. He ordered the Duke to be as quiet as possible, but he did not expect at all that a strong blow would land on his head. The gentleman didn't care at all whether he had a weapon or not, and in fact he had wanted to get rid of it for a long time. And it seems that the gentleman had planned from the very beginning to fight without weapons, while the teacher could not believe her eyes that the Duke was capable of such a thing. As soon as the hero dropped his weapon, the other criminals decided to attack him, and weapons glittered in their hands. None of them expected that the Duke had such dexterous skills and fighting abilities. And the venerable commander of the knightly detachment, Johann, will come to his aid, whose appearance turned out to be even more unexpected. The heroine was sure that the gentleman would have an engagement today, but as it turned out, due to problems with the temple, the father hastily staged a staged engagement with the daughter of a local lord. So Johann came to help, to repay the favor received on the day of the Great Walk. He noticed that the teacher had already found an escort given the Grand Duke's temperament. A couple of such vices was not surprising. The Duke stated that he had a great idea to stun the knight commander, use him as bait and simply escape. The lady was worried that it would be dangerous if the commander really came here alone, and he also had no idea what was going on here. As soon as the lady uttered the words about danger, it was at that moment that she seemed to understand all the terrible realities of what was happening. And even before that moment, her body, in which the instinct of self-preservation now prevailed, involuntarily began to move. And the teacher seemed to have a premonition of this, and at that very second, she grabbed the dagger and swung her hand. It was at that very moment that Vendister's talent manifested itself, and a sharp blade flew out of the girl's hands in the perfect direction. Her movements were so correct that the tip of the knife hit the weapon that the bandit was swinging. And at that very moment, the talent that she had carefully hidden for many years finally blossomed and manifested itself in full. Even the captain was stunned that an ordinary teacher threw a dagger so deftly that she disarmed the main bandit. The criminal was defeated, the man fell to the floor, and he certainly did not expect that his plan would fail. The captain laughed that a fragile girl could do such a thing with a tiny knife, and the Duke noted that the teacher's skills were simply excellent, and that she had really trained in throwing techniques. For some reason, the heroes were incredibly calm, as if nothing was happening here, but the noise seemed to be increasing, and the teacher assumed that the guards of this place were approaching. The captain shielded the lady and asked her to hide. It seemed there were quite a lot of people, and Efna just wanted to escape from this place as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, they didn't even have time to move, and people had already entered the main auction hall. Johann was afraid that something unpleasant might happen, because no one knew who these people were and why they had come here. The teacher watched everything that was happening in silence, and after just a couple of seconds she was able to exhale. Because right in front of the heroes, the Empire's magic control knights appeared, arriving instantly on the captain's orders. They even took Hendrix with them, who had been enjoying a level of comfort he didn't deserve. This Marquis tried to escape, but the Duke was sure he would be useful as a witness, and they used the magic stones as if they were ordinary pebbles. The auctioning of people has long since gone out of fashion among the aristocracy, but these people must have succeeded in it, since they still come here. The auction was one of the places the Duke kept a close eye on, and for a while it was quiet, so he stopped the surveillance one day. Just think, the Duke managed to reveal everything together, where he came to catch someone in an affair, and the teacher could be called his lucky star. In fact, the heroine was simply doing her kindergarten chores, and she didn't even suspect that everything could turn out like this. Touching her neck, scarlet drops of blood appeared on the girl's palms, which were probably left by the sharp blade. The captain carefully touched the wound and, with her permission, wanted to look at the injury. The teacher tried to hide the scratches, but Johann had already noticed everything and just wanted to take a second look. There were indeed some shallow cuts left. Johann sighed because it was a huge relief for him. Since the heroine was hit by a dirty weapon, the wound needs to be disinfected as soon as possible. Perhaps Johann was being too straightforward with the girl right now, but he just wanted to help her. In a second, the bleeding had completely stopped. The captain's magical abilities were outstanding, and she would very much like him to come to work in the kindergarten infirmary. Every day the children received bruises and scratches, and the captain laughed and imagined how he used magical powers to heal the children in the kindergarten. And in that case, he would see his beloved little Malin every day, and not only her. Everyone always says that a fragile girl can never hit, but not if she gets really angry. And now Letitia didn't care at all. Her soul was pierced by a sharp pain, and she continued to beat the worthless young man without a twinge of conscience. From the very beginning, the girl assumed that this man was suspicious. She tried to ignore it, because in fact she simply loved him. The young man asked the girl to listen to her carefully, assuring her that in fact he also loved her very much. He was also well aware of the ducal family's main business, the liberation of slaves and social welfare, and Letitia was not ready to forgive a man who challenged the ducal family's ideology. The girl had probably just recently cried over a broken heart, but at that moment she didn't look like a girl in love. Letitia had finally put aside her foolish thoughts, and now she was a worthy lady husband who had defended the honor of the house in front of everyone. 3 days later, little Aristia happily came to kindergarten and politely greeted her wonderful teacher. The lady was delighted to see her return and was confident that her sister was doing well and would soon make a full recovery. Imagine her surprise when the little girl asked the teacher to look at someone, and it was all thanks to her care. A purple-haired heroine appeared in front of the teacher, no longer looking like the suffering girl. Letitia looked simply incredible, but her face was shining with a smile. She was incredibly grateful to Lady Ethna for helping her reveal the whole truth. From then on, the girl felt incredibly healthy. She no longer experienced painful mental anguish in relation to this fool. Now Letitia ate 5 times a day and trained diligently, and her actions were worthy of admiration. The teacher didn't even believe that the girl in front of her was cheerful and that she had always been like that, while Letitia wanted to wait for the teacher just to talk to her. The guards did not allow the lady to communicate and stated that the lady had too much work left in the mansion. With the feeling of having another annoying guardian, Ethna finally returned to kindergarten, and before the teacher could rejoice, Children's Day had arrived. Ethna always prepared for important events with trepidation and told her colleagues about the upcoming plan. Usually the director's opinion could not be called an opinion. Most likely it was an order, and this time the lady decided to express it. Since they had recently discovered outdoor spaces on campus, the director suggested organizing something where children and their caregivers could participate together. The weather had been nice the last few days. The idea sounded tempting, and the teacher asked what about drawing and essay competitions. Felix was sure that if he organized survival games with toy guns and paint, this would be the best holiday for children. On the one hand, it sounded wonderful, and the director even suggested coming up with something similar. Unfortunately, all the ideas had to be carried out by Lady Ethna, and as the organizer, she had to be responsible for the event. It was a beautiful sunny day outside, and the teacher and the children decided to spend time outdoors. The lady carefully tied an incredibly cute hat on Band-Aid so that he would not lose it again while running. This cap turned out to be protective equipment, and the older brother decided to help the little gentleman with this. The toy gun in the gentleman's hands looked even better than he had expected, and it was hard to believe that the weapon was actually not real. Parents and children were given toy guns, and Letitia, with a sly look, said that the little girl should put her whole heart into the shot. The emperor promised Maxim that if he took first place, he would give him the castle of the Baron of Vulcan, which he had recently acquired. It was clear that a battle was about to break out on the field, and the teacher didn't even know whether to be happy about it, but it had become a routine for her class. Felix had already finished his preparations and asked if there were any spare pistols that might come in handy. The little heroes, along with their parents, had to defeat the other team, which was their opponent. The little ones bravely picked up toy guns, and the kids from the amazing class called the Solar Council were ready to join the game. Every day, the teacher gave these children a piece of her soul, and today she suggested starting a competition to find out who would do the best. But she knew that each child is unique, and she is ready to continue to give her care and energy so that these children grow up to be the most wonderful.